get us started. I'd like to call the business meeting of the Portland Board of Public Education to order. It is Tuesday, June 30th, 2020. The Portland Board of Public Education is meeting virtually through Zoom. Could I ask the superintendent to call the roll, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mr. Atkinson?
Here.
Mr. Balfons?
Here.
Ms. Bondo?
Présente.
Mr. Burke?
Here.
Ms. Figdor?
Here.
Ms. Morioni?
Here.
Ms. Thompson?
Here.
Ms. Trevorrow?
Here.
Ms. Brown?
Here.
Mr. Casiel Reyes? Ms. Habib Zai? Mr. Parrott? Ms. Yangala?
Yes, I'm here.
And Chair Rodriguez.
Presente. Let's do the Pledge of Allegiance. I'm not sure who's going to be able to broadcast the flag, and then let's all unmute and we'll get through it.
Janet, are you able to do the flag? Do you want me to do it?
Yeah, I just need a second.
Okay.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America
and to the republic
for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Janet.
Thank you, Janet. Next, for the report of the chair, or rather for the remarks of the chair, I just have a short statement I want to read to get us started, and then I'll hand it off to the superintendent for his remarks, if he has any tonight. So, good evening again. The purpose of tonight's special meeting is for the board to take action on the resolution to discontinue the Memorandum of Understanding with the Portland Police Department for school resource officers. Fellow board members, while I expect there to be a difference in opinion for many parts of the discussion tonight, I want us all to take a moment and acknowledge what we do share in common, and that's a commitment to place the interests of students above all others in every decision that we make. That's what's expected of each board member, as stated in our Code of Ethics, for which we're all held accountable by our fellow board members should any one of us fail to live up to that commitment. Superintendent Botana, staff, brothers, sisters, and friends, my hope is that by the end of tonight's meeting, you all feel that your voices were heard, especially if you disagree with the outcome and the decisions made here tonight. Our children's needs can be met when this entire community stands in solidarity. And I believe that we can do that while we work through our differences. My goal tonight is to run a meeting that facilitates a conversation that moves us forward together with an expectation that we respect each other's views, opinions, our work, and the commitment made by all of us to strengthen Portland Public Schools. Superintendent Botana made a comment during one of our recent conversations. He said, fundamentally, we are an institution of learning. If we, the leaders of this district, cannot model behavior that demonstrates the journey as we learn how to lead, who can we expect will follow us during this work and then lead us tomorrow? I look forward to our discussion, and I'll hand it over now to the superintendent for his report if he's ready to present tonight.
Because it's a special meeting, I do not have remarks prepared for this section. I will have a recommendation when we get to the action item on the agenda.
And that's what I was thinking as well. So next, then we'll move. We do have a report of the secretary item. So consideration and action to approve the minutes of the meeting of June 16, 2020. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Ms. Thompson, second by Ms. Bondo. Are there any questions on the motion? Seeing none, is there any public comment on the motion? Seeing none, any board discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes of the meeting of June 16, 2020, please indicate. And we can do a show of hand. I think all board members screen. Mr. Bart, there you go. And that's unanimous, with the students voting with a majority as well. Before we get to the main item on our agenda, I just want to pause and queue it up. I won't do it right now, but I will queue it up. Before we get to any public comment, I'm going to go over our public comment process and our rules. And I'm going to take my time to do that and try to be as clear as possible. And then throughout any public comment that we receive tonight, just try to reiterate it. I want us to make sure that we stick to a process that we all agree on and that we are consistent throughout the evening. So again, when we get to that point, I'll take time to do that. So next is old business: consideration and action to adopt the resolution to discontinue the Memorandum of Understanding with the Portland Police Department for school resource officers. Is there a motion? Ms. Victor, second by Mr. Atkinson. I'm going to ask the superintendent to speak to the motion, please.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, board members and members of the public. Last October 29th, I stood in front of this board and introduced a conversation about implementing body-worn cameras by our school resource officers. At the time, I spoke in glowing terms about the value of officers in our schools, noting that they work in tandem with our staff, serving at once as first responders, safety experts, crime deterrents, adjunct administrators, counselors, mentors, and police department public relations and community outreach officials. This perspective was not based solely on my experience in Portland. My friend Dion Campbell, current chief of police in Michigan City, Indiana, was my school resource officer for 5 of the 6 years I worked there. Dion, who is African American, a graduate of City, a high school and college star basketball player, and an ordained minister, indeed was all of those things. My experience in City, along with my observations of our work of our own SROs, tainted my perspective. I had, as everyone else in this room, watched in horror the brutal footage of the actions of SROs in Atlanta, Albuquerque, and Chicago, among other places. As a leader, I've had my own personal experiences with ineffective SROs. But when I stood in front of this board last October, I was not talking about those situations. I was talking about the exceptional school resource officers that I've come to know and value. I was talking about Dion. I was talking about our Portland SROs. I was also heavily influenced by the challenge of keeping schools safe in a time when school shootings are the greatest fear of any school administrator. Just a couple of years ago, the Parkland shooting reminded us how easy it is to create unmitigated havoc in a community. The toll of so many lives gone in a few minutes weighs heavily on the minds and consciences of every school administrator I know. And yes, we all know that there were SROs at Parkland, as there have been in so many of the other school shootings, and that for the most part, SROs make a difference in the number of lives lost in those events. And I was influenced by the comfort of knowing that in at least 2 of our schools, when we need to engage with the police department, we would be doing so with someone familiar with our staff, our circumstances, and our policies. Traditionally, our experience in our other 16 schools is more of a roll of the dice as to whether the responding officer will have the experience, expertise, disposition, and sensitivity to interact positively in those situations. But I recognize today that I missed some things. First, I missed the troubling array of policies currently in place that provide the police extensive and largely unwarranted access to our students, including access to student educational records, camera footage, and the results of administrative searches. I've come to recognize that familiarity, breeds sloppiness. As a result of the day-to-day interactions of our staff with law enforcement, including the extensive access we grant to probation officers, our students are too easily questioned or exposed to law enforcement's reach. Because of lax training of our staff on our policies, our students are too easily reached at school and have their information shared with law enforcement. On the national level, schools have come to rely on police to enforce student behavior norms. Calling them has become the quickest way to solve our problems. And we're not above that. You've heard in previous comments made to the board how we, as school staff, sometimes call on the police to help us manage the difficult conversations that we would otherwise have to have and do by ourselves. Second, I miss the fact that for many of our students, seeing a police officer as they walk in the door provides a sense of security. For others, it has the opposite effect. This came home to me during the recent closure. Two respected community organizations reached out to us to provide books to some of our students. Both of those organizations had the plan to engage the police to deliver books to students at home. Notwithstanding their good intentions, it was instantly clear to me that we could not agree to that plan, knowing as we do that for many families, seeing a police officer standing at their door would not be a welcome sight. Yet, I completely ignored the fact that the young adults in many of those households are subjected to that same sight every day as they enter their school. It is in that context that I recommend that we discontinue the Memorandum of Understanding with the Portland Police Department for the school resource officers. I hope that you see that I've not arrived at this recommendation lightly. In addition to the introspection that I've discussed, I have had multiple conversations with board members and staff, including our high school leaders. I'm also well read on the topic and familiar with our data and the national data. I've read the dozens of emails and letters on the subject that have been sent by community members on different sides of this issue. Like many of you and many others in the community, this has been a process of deliberative and reflective analysis of the pros and cons of having school resource officers. What started as an almost casual recommendation to implement body-worn cameras back in October has evolved into a larger conversation set against the backdrop of the movement to recognize the role of law enforcement as an institution in perpetuating white supremacist structures in our institutions, including our schools and in the larger society. This process has had multiple opportunities for thought-provoking conversations, testimony, survey, news stories, and reading. And while the process may not have been perfect, it would be folly to say that there has been no process, as some have indicated in recent weeks. Beginning in the fall, continuing through our budget process, and now through this resolution, there have been few issues in my tenure in Portland that have involved more people or where I have seen board members as engaged or where I've learned as much. While I support discontinuing the MOU, there are important issues that I would like to see addressed prior to approving the resolution. I am specifically most concerned about the resolution plank that prohibits staff from calling the police in anything but situations that pose a real and immediate risk of serious physical harm. Those words are loaded with subjectivity that have the potential to result in unintended consequences all around. Moreover, as I noted earlier, there are 9 policies that regulate the relationship between the district and law enforcement. As you know, we discussed with the board's policy committee in late May, engaging in a process to revise those policies from top to bottom, regardless of the outcome of this resolution discussion. Among those policies are policy JIC, our school code of conduct policy, which requires staff to report serious violations to law enforcement. There is no definition of serious. Policy JICI, our alcohol and substance abuse policy, that requires reporting repeat violations by elementary students, but interestingly, not secondary students, to the police. Other policies permit school staff to make reports and share records with equally ambiguous and subjective language as that in this resolution. This is the time to engage in a thorough revision of all of these policies in collaboration with school staff, students, community experts, juvenile justice advocates, law enforcement officials, and legal counsel. Develop a policy for how the district relates with law enforcement, and that clearly delineates which types or categories of actions should result in a referral to law enforcement and allow for careful monitoring and review of calls to the police by the superintendent's office. These revisions, consistent with what we have heard from many staff members, should prioritize the voices of students of color in order to create a plan to meet the safety and educational needs of our students in an alternative way and ensure that the lack of an SRO at DHS and PHS does not result in more referrals to the police. I am also concerned about the resolution plank that requires that the funds saved by the elimination of the SRO program be used to fund the district's unfunded equity priorities. It is true, as you heard at our recent board focus review of our district's equity work, that there are important elements of our equity work that are not funded locally, such as our Director of Equity and Director of Clinical Services. However, there continue to be safety needs that must be funded. You've heard from our school administrators in particular as they grapple with the complexity of their work. Specifically, the district hosts numerous sporting and other events over the course of the year that require a security presence. These needs, particularly around DHS and PHS, are often met by our SROs. Going forward, we will need to contract with the police department to have appropriate security on hand at these types of events. Last week, I discussed my recommendation to discontinue the MOU with Chief Frank Clark. I am reassured and grateful that the police department enjoys strong leadership devoted to our safety and well-being and committed to continuing to find ways to build stronger ties between our police force and the community they serve. As I mentioned earlier, one of the greatest benefits of the school resource officers is that administrators and staff are assured that when we have a situation at either DHS or PHS that may require law enforcement involvement, we know that we will be engaging with an officer who is known and knows us, knowledgeable about how school policy interacts with the law, and understanding adolescent minds and youth development. This is not the case in the remaining 16 schools. To that end, Chief Clark and I discussed the possibility of establishing a set of officers to go through specialized SRO training and serve as contacts to our leaders throughout the district. We may need to allocate some of the funding currently devoted to the SRO program for this purpose. There are other potential investments that may be needed to implement the revised policies that we cannot envision at this moment. There are other support structures, such as our DHS deans, or training on restorative practices, or uniform staff development on de-escalation techniques that are not currently in our budget. I would ask that this plank of the resolution be revised to reflect the need for flexibility to use the savings from discontinuation of the SRO MOU to support safety and programmatic needs as they become known. I'm also compelled to raise an unpleasant reality that must be named. We are not exempt from the horrors of school shootings. As we all know, SROs do not prevent school shootings. However, it is important for this board to recognize, as I do, that if we ever face a shooting in our schools, the fact that we do not have an SRO will be central to the discussion. Never mind that SROs take sick days and vacations or are out of school on other duties, and that tragedies could happen during those times. Never mind that we don't have SROs in the other 16 schools. You and I will be held accountable for that tragedy differently because of the fact that we don't have an SRO at either PHS or DHS. We are living in a time of reckoning with institutional racism. We are actively reassessing whether the policies and practices that have long been the hallmark of our school system are truly grounded in equity, or are the markers of a system designed to reinforce the status quo. I have listened carefully to testimony offered on both sides of this issue. I have read the scores of letters and emails that have been sent to this board on the issue, and I have reflected carefully on the question of whether our school system is more just with or without school resource officers. I've concluded that so many of the roles and values that we ascribe to our school resource officer is the result of a culture that prioritizes order over learning and the sense of safety of some over the trauma of others. Portland is an exceptional place. I truly believe that what makes Portland exceptional is its commitment to being a welcoming and inclusive community. We're not there yet, but we continue to strive for that ideal. I believe that we will emerge closer to that ideal from the difficult conversations that are taking place today and in the previous weeks on this issue, and by the work that we will need to engage in to revise our policies and procedures in response to this resolution. And I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have on my recommendation.
Thank you, Superintendent, for that. Let's take it right into that. I see Ms. Figdor has her hand raised. You can unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to make a motion to incorporate the changes recommended by the superintendent into the underlying resolution.
I second it.
Okay, so do we have language that we can use that'll help us clearly state what changes we're referring to? Superintendent?
Toggle between two screens. I have language that I would be happy to offer for that purpose.
For so Ms. Figdor, since you're offering an amendment, Ms. Figdor, do you want to see what the superintendent's language is? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, please.
Yes.
I heard specific language as the superintendent was speaking, but yes, absolutely. If there's a way to circulate that language, and maybe one of us can put it into the chat as well, so all the attendees can see it as well.
I can drop it into the chat if that would be helpful.
Thank you.
Chair, I just want to clarify one thing real quick. So right now, we're acting on the superintendent's recommendations, and then we'll come back to the main motion. Is that correct?
Right. So right now, I guess so we have the motion on the floor, and then there's a motion to amend the main motion on the floor. So after we go through that, we'll go back to the main motion, and we'll see what it looks like at that point, whether this amendment passes or not.
Okay. And at the appropriate time, I have an amendment as well. Thank you.
I cannot, for some reason, drop it in. Maybe it's too long.
Okay.
Let me do it in two different pieces. So that is the amendment to the use of the funding. And that is the amendment to the one that speaks to calls to the police.
I'll give board members a few moments to take a look at that.
So Superintendent, with that, just to clarify what you sent, if that's all right, Chair?
Pardon me?
Could I just clarify what the superintendent sent?
Yes, please.
So the second change is to replace what had been there in terms of prohibiting staff from making calls to the police except in certain circumstances?
Correct.
Excellent, thank you. And I'm just seeing that this was sent to the panelists, but not to the attendees. So I can try to send it to all the attendees as well, so people who are watching and participating can see it.
Thank you for pointing that out, yeah.
So I'm sorry, what are we waiting for, Chair?
I'm sorry, Emily, were you looking to, okay, Emily just shared it with the attendees to make sure that everyone take a look at it. So there's a motion on the floor. Are there any questions on
I have a question.
Ms. Victor? Ms. Victor, go ahead.
My question is whether, at our last meeting, we talked about how the Portland Police Department is our designated law enforcement agency. Sorry, my daughter's in the background here. And I'm wondering if the second resolve clause that you have proposed here as an amendment to the initial resolution would take on, would have us evaluate whether we continue that relationship. My understanding is we don't need to designate a law enforcement agency, and that doing so gives the police greater access to our students in multiple ways. And so looking at that would be part of this process that you're proposing with staff, students, and others in the community?
Yes, it would.
Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Morioni, do you have a question? Go for it. So I don't know if you can unmute yourself. Go for it.
I can, thank you. I just forgot how to raise my hand. I apologize. I just want to ask the superintendent in the text that he writes about a thorough revision of all these policies in collaboration, and you list school staff, students, community experts, juvenile justice advocates, law enforcement officials, and legal counsel. I'm curious as to, are you envisioning a type of committee or a type of task force, or with the various representatives? I just wanted more specifics on that.
I obviously am introducing this. I don't have the details on all of that. This would be an inclusive process similar to what we are following as we are revising our sexual harassment policy, where we've invited anybody who wanted to be a part of that conversation into the room, or it has multiple organizations that work in that arena are a part of the discussion. And so I think this is attempting to respond to both the suggestions that school staff have filed with the board over the course of the past few weeks. This, borrows heavily from language in some of those letters that you received, and also incorporates best practice as suggested for policy development, that broadly and specifically the Cutler Institute's sort of in that particular case around reviewing the results of the SRO program, but in this case would be in revising our policies as they impact the school district's relationship with the police.
Can I ask a follow-up around the word all of these policies? I'm curious as if we need to be more specific as to, I know that in our policy committee we had the list of 9, but I'd like to also add the specific ones of these policies, only because for the board and for the community understand which exact policies you're referring to.
And those 9 policies and what they are and what they specify are included in the board packet. So
right.
Everybody has access to that. And so it's, top to bottom, all of those policies.
No, I understand that, but I'm just wondering, you may not know which policies. I'm just requesting if we could just add language into that paragraph that you're wanting to transpose, put in the policy acronyms even into this referendum, just so we know, the community knows which policies we're referring to.
Excuse me. Do we have any other questions? Okay. So I want to just pause here for a moment, procedure-wise, and just backtrack a little bit to what I said at the beginning. We had a main motion that was second, and then we had an amendment that we're considering now. I'm going to take public comments, and I want to be really clear that the public comment that we're going to be asking for is in regards to the amendment that Ms. Victor is proposing for the language that we posted on the chat. After we have the public comment on this amendment, the board will have further discussion and vote on the amendment, at which point then we will go to the main motion and then talk about the resolution as it stands at that point. And that process then will also include an opportunity for questions and then public comment on that, on where we are at that time. Should there be another amendment, then we'll repeat this process again. So I'm about to open it up for public comment, but before I do that, yep, Superintendent, go for it. I'm sorry. Unmute.
Ms. Morioni just suggested that we include the actual policies, the 9 policies. So it's not my amendment. Obviously, it's Ms. Figdor's, but from my perspective, that would be fine. Could be incorporated in here as a set of bullet points with from that document that we could just carry over to this. So I would personally be fine to do that, and just want to make sure that it doesn't get lost as you are, proceeding, because I know that Ms. Morioni presented that. So I don't know if that's an amendment or if it's accepted as a friendly amendment. That's.
Ms. Victor, since this is your motion, I'll let you kind of address that, whether you want to take it as a friendly amendment or how you want that to be reflected in your motion.
Thank you. I think Ms. Morioni makes a good point, and I would suggest that we say, rather than all of these policies, we say all policies that involve law enforcement, and then in parentheses list out the specific policies, the acronyms or the reference names. Right. Ms. Morioni, does that work for you?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you both. Appreciate that. All right. So I'm going to read our public comment process rules. And again, as I said at the beginning, I want to be as clear as possible. So meetings of the board are public in the sense that they're held in public. This does not mean that they're public meetings in the same sense as a town meeting. So, however, comments and concerns related to the matters under consideration by the board are welcome within the guidelines that I'm about to list. I will provide an opportunity for public comment during consideration of each agenda item, and in order to conduct meetings efficiently, please be aware of the rules. Prior to board action, the public is offered an opportunity for brief comments on each agenda item, but shall wait until I announce, is there any public comment on this item? Any person wishing to address the school board will be recognized by the chair and come forward to speak, state his or her name and address before speaking. Let me read that again a little bit carefully. Any person wishing to address the school board shall be recognized by the board chair and come forward to the microphone and state his or her name and address before speaking. Speakers must address all comments and questions to the chair. Each person may speak once for up to 3 minutes for each agenda item. Persons wishing to speak for more than 3 minutes on any item shall request that the board vote on an extension of time. On a night like tonight, where we expect a long series of public comments, we may limit people to just those initial 3 minutes. And I will ask the board before we begin if that's the direction they wish to follow tonight. Speakers may indicate support for a previous speaker's comments, but are asked not to be repetitious of comments already made to the board in the interest of the most efficient use of time. No complaints or allegations will be allowed in public concerning any staff members or any person connected with the school district. Persons present at our meetings are requested to, this is more for when we're in person, but to not applaud or otherwise express approval or disapproval for any statements made or actions taken by the board. The primary purpose of the meeting is for the board to conduct its business as charged by law. So spontaneous discussion, and again, this is more for when we're live, spontaneous discussion as well as disorder and disruption prevent the board from doing his work and will not be permitted. So again, I'll remind us, we're going to take public comment on the amendment on the floor, and I'm going to call out your name that is listed on the participants window, and then I'll start with the 3 minutes. As soon as you begin speaking, when you have 30 seconds left, I will interrupt you to let you know that you have 30 seconds left. And right at the 3-minute mark, I am going to mute your microphone, and then the board can decide whether we're going to grant more time. So I'm going to try to follow the very same procedure for all of our speakers tonight and try to be as consistent across the board.
Excuse me, Chair. Can you just remind folks that may just be joining us that what we're taking public comment on right now is the amendment proposed by Ms. Figdor and not on the whole resolution?
Correct. So one more time, I'll remind, we are taking public comment on the amendment that Ms. Figdor is proposing and the language that she is asking that we consider adopting to change the resolution on the main motion. So having said that, I'll go then first to Ms. Andrea Levinsky, and just give me a second before you start so I can coordinate my stopwatch.
Sure, just let me know when you're ready.
Yep. All right, go for it, Andrea.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andrea Levinsky. I live in South Portland at 39 Cumberland Road, but I do teach at Portland High School. I would like to strongly support the amendment made by Superintendent Botana. This amendment makes me proud to work in the Portland Public Schools. Just one thing, I noticed that when Superintendent Botana was speaking, I think what I understood was he specifically talked about having the money saved, some of it specifically be earmarked for Portland High and Deering High, and I don't see that reflected in the written comments. So I support everything as a staff member at Portland High who works there every day with students, but would want to specifically name Portland and Deering High School as earmarking the funds, at least most of the funds saved. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm gonna last time we did this, someone was helping me just write the names in the chat of the next few, because I know that the attendees cannot see who's next on the queue. So just to spare me the trouble of calling them out. Ms. Victor, I see you nodding, appreciate it. So next, we're gonna go to Dave Moran, and then we'll see in the chat the next the people that are next up. Dave.
Yes, thank you. Dave Moran. I live at 81 Deepwood Drive in Portland. With respect to the superintendent's comments here around the elimination of the SRO program, which I tend to like that. I like the idea of SROs from a community policing standpoint and thinking about reforms. Certainly an advocate for retaining them, but specifically on the proposal supporting safety and programmatic needs. If we're going to defund or not the elimination of the SROs and apply the funding elsewhere, some of the language. So safety, security enhancement, staff training, unmet equity needs. So a couple of things. Is there any plans or declaration in terms of proportionally where these funds are going to go? Are we going to, 50-50 on security versus equity? And I'd like a little more clarity on when we talk about unmet equity needs, what are we talking about there? A little more specifics or examples. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moran. I want to just be clear, the public comment is not necessarily intended to be a back and forward, but I think a lot of the questions that we're here, including what you just said, Mr. Moran, are things that we'll want to clarify. So we will, and I will make note of that question, and hopefully we can address it. But we might not be able to engage.
No, that's perfectly fair. Yeah, so we leave those as questions. Don't have to answer them now, but yeah, just things I'd like to see clarified. Thank you.
Certainly. You still have 2 more minutes if you have anything else to say. Otherwise, we can move on to the next person.
I'll let you move on. It's probably a lot to cover.
Thank you. We appreciate it. You have a good night. Next, we're going to go to Michael Kabidi, and then I'm going to say the next few names. I know that they're in the chat, but after Michael, we're going to go to Olivia Bean, and then Lex Jackson, and then Eileen DePonte, and Sarah O'Barr. Michael?
Thank you, Superintendent Botana. Thank you, Chair Rodriguez. Thank you, members of the school board. My name is Michael Kabidi. I'm policy counsel for the ACLU of Maine. I am interested in speaking in favor of the policy amendment, but in suggesting an edit to the funding amendment. The funding amendment seems to leave ambiguous whether the school board actually pays the police station for police training. My recommendation to the board is that the board consider verifying whether the police can cover that training out of its own funds first before offering to pay for that training. I had the opportunity to hear a hearing at the HHS committee of the City of Portland on June 9th, where Portland Police gave a presentation about what they do and about their funding. And I could swear I heard that they had unfilled positions, which suggests to me that they might have extra money. And knowing how crunched the budget environment is in the school board and in the school district, I strongly recommend that the school board amend the funding amendment, edit the funding amendment, so that the Portland Police Department is required to look for alternative sources of funding before relying on this funding. And thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Next, we're going to Olivia Bean. Ms. Bean?
Yes. Hi. I want to talk about 2 things. So in relation to the First Amendment, as has already been stated, that last part about where the funding is going.
Olivia, I'm so sorry. Do you mind just giving us your name and your address?
Oh, yes. I'm so sorry.
That's right. You still have the entirety, by the way.
I'm Olivia Bean. I live at 37 Casco Street in Portland. I also teach at Portland High. Sorry, totally spaced. In the First Amendment, the language around where the funding is going isn't as specific as it should be. There's nothing prioritizing the 2 schools where the funding is coming from. and there's not a lot of specificity about what security enhancements or staff training means. And in regards to the second amendment, well, the second part, I don't know if it's a whole different amendment, but there is not a date of when there should be like even an initial plan around revising these policies, and particularly considering how busy people will be, because who knows what COVID will be doing next year. I think to be responsible, we need some sort of deadline to keep people accountable for actually working on these in a timely manner. I'm done.
Thank you, Olivia. Next, we're going to Lex Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Lex Jackson. My pronouns are he and they, and I live at 50 Turner Street here in Portland. I'm an ed tech with Portland Public Schools. And I also want to express some concern about the first part of the amendment regarding the use of funds saved by the elimination of the SRO program. I support safety and security in schools, but the evidence shows that it's policing broadly, not even just as an institution, but as an idea that is inherently racist. So we're not talking about Portland Police Department or law enforcement. We're talking about the idea of policing students. And that's just not our job. Our job as educators is to support our students, not to police them. And so I'm concerned that if we were to divert some of these funds to other policing efforts or systems, if we were replacing SROs with other racist systems of policing, then in that way we would still be participating in racism as a district. I'm done.
Thank you, Lex. Next, we're going to Eileen DePonte, and I'll read off the next couple of names: Sarah Aubert, Naila Wisa, and Emily P. Eileen DePonte.
Hi, my name is Eileen DuPont. I live at 133 Deepwood Drive in Portland, Maine. I'm a teacher at Portland High School. I do not support this amendment. I do believe a thorough revision of policies is needed, but I don't think that we should be eliminating our SROs before a solid safety plan developed by students and staff is in place. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And next, we're going to Sarah Aubert.
Hi, I'm Sarah Obari. I live at 37 Birchwood Drive in Portland. I'm a teacher at Portland High School and a parent of 2 children in Portland Public Schools. I just want to thank the chair for your initial remarks before this whole thing started, and to remind us that we're committed to all our students in Portland. I really appreciated that to set the tone for tonight. And I also want to thank the superintendent, because I was skeptical when the chair said that he hoped that we all would feel heard. And after hearing the superintendent's remarks, I do feel for myself, and I think for a lot of us at Portland High, that we have been heard through his remarks. So I want to thank both of them. I'm in support of the spirit of these amendments, and I have 2 quick concerns that are shared, I think, already by some. The first being that it says, as they become known in the first part, so as issues come up, the money would be earmarked for specific things. And I just want to see a proactive plan with a date and a process for how we do a needs assessment after we remove the SROs at these 2 schools. I'd like to have a time frame and a solid process and plan for how we come up with that. And I also share the concerns about specifically naming Portland High School and Deering High School as priority to some of this funding, since those are the schools that are impacted here. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sarah. Next, Emily P. And I'm just going to read, Emily, before you get started, I want to read off the next few names. So next we're going...
You missed Nyla Wisa.
Did I skip? Oh, I'm sorry. So Emily, I'm going to leave you there if you just mind staying muted. And did I... Sorry about that. All right, Nyla Wisa.
Chair, I would like to save my comment for the end to comment on the resolution. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. I'll move you back then to the to attendees list. All right, so Emily P. Emily. We're gonna leave Emily there just to see if she's having a problem unmuting, and we'll go to Catherine Knox.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Thank you for the opportunity. Kate Knox, 76 Old Birch Lane in Portland. I'm a parent of 2 children, 4 and 8 in the Portland Public Schools. I just want to very briefly thank the superintendent for his remarks. I am I'm grateful for his thoughtful analysis of these issues. I also want to emphasize that, excuse me, that I support the spirit of keeping the funding focused, and it should be a priority for Portland and Deering. I defer to the teachers, the superintendent, and the school board as to how best to allocate that funding and what that would look like. But I think it's important that the money stay there and that we support the work of those schools and that we give them the additional tools they need to make this transition be successful. So I appreciate the time and am supportive of the amendments.
Thank you, Kate. So I'm going to try, I want to see Emily P. I'm not sure if you're able to unmute yourself. If not, I'm going to just leave Emily there and just, because I'm hoping that we can figure it out. Meanwhile, we'll go to Violet Sulka Hayes.
Hi, thank you. My name is Violet Sulka Hughes, and I live at 42 Hartley Street in Portland, Maine. I am a recent alum of Portland Public High Schools, and I have a few comments on both of these sections of the resolution. Firstly, I'd like to continue on Lex's point about the safety and security measure of the first funding allocation resolution. I would be wary of any resolution that broadly gives funding to safety and security, because safety and security are often coded languages that allow further policing. Instead, I would suggest that the money be divested from any sort of policing and potentially go towards, further staffing, as we already know that Portland Public Schools are understaffed and under-resourced, and it could go to other staff, both teachers and counselors, social workers, things like that. Specifically also hiring more, so Black and brown teachers and staff. And secondly, for the second part of the amendment, I would just like to say that I think the sort of board or group of people overseeing the policy changes and the referral to law enforcement should be made up primarily of students, because students should be at the center of these policies and know what is best for themselves. So they should be given the most voice and power instead of, these institutions that are often continuing to marginalize them. Thank you.
Thank you, Violet. Next, we're going to go to Krista Bowe. Krista?
Thanks. My name is Krista Bowe. I live at 308 Danforth Street. I'm a mom of 4 Reiki kids. And Violet actually touched on many of the comments that I was going to make, so I'll keep it short. I really just want to say that I think the funds should be allocated to what we were told this year was the budget priority, which is the achievement gap. And that's something that I think should be a priority. And I just want to say that that's where I think the funds should be allocated. And I do support this resolution. I think that all of those policies should absolutely be revisited. And I would like to just say that I think students should absolutely have a large voice in that process as well. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Krista. Emily P., are you, I'm going to move you back to the attendees. Actually, I don't think that would make a difference. Let's go next to, I'm going to go to Thomas Victor, and then Thomas, before you start to speak, I just want to read off the names of the next few people behind you in line. So after Thomas, we're going to go to John Torch, then Thomas Watson, and then Mackenzie O'Connor, and then Madeline Goodman. Okay, Thomas?
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go for it.
Great. Hi, my name is Thomas Victor. I live on 46 Hamlet Avenue, Portland, Maine. And as another recent graduate of PPS, I want to thank the whole board for considering the removal of SROs. I think even though if their intention was to be in schools to help, reduce the danger and fear that students could have of things like mass shootings, it's really important that you guys reconsidered that, especially at a time like this where I think a lot of people are sort of analyzing the way they look at cops in a much different way. I have one question about the allocation of the funds that would otherwise be spent on SROs. I believe earlier you guys were talking about focusing those funds mostly on the 2 schools that have SROs. And I would just like to say that not every school had an officer, but I think every school in PPS deserves more funding to try and tackle some of the problems that SROs were put in there to try and solve. Great, thank you.
Thank you, Victor. Or Thomas, excuse me. All right, next we'll go to John Torch.
Hey there. My name is John Torch. My pronouns are he, him. I live in Parkside. I have been working in the PPS system for the last year, and I'm a grad student at USM. I've spoken before on the last meeting kind of about my general thoughts about this. On these resolutions, I do have, it seems like the spirit is good. I would support the spirit of them. I am a little concerned about 2 specific things. The first being the statement about the superintendent using funds saved by the elimination of the program to flexibly support safety needs, safety and security enhancements. It feels a little vague. It almost feels like a way around this resolution. I'm concerned that maybe that includes like subcontracting to private security or finding some way to bring this system back into our school. I second kind of what Lex's thoughts on that were. So I'd love a little more clarity on like the limitations of what that funding could be, because safety and security seems like a huge umbrella term to be approving. And then on the other resolution, I got the impression from the superintendent's comments that his amendments seem to be in the spirit of delaying removing the school resource officers until this process can happen. And I'm curious, I don't see anything specific to that in the language. Maybe I'm not catching it quite from that language, but I would love clarity for the community and hopefully the board considers the clarity there of if this delays the removal of the SROs. And if it does, I would, number one, suggest that you don't support the amendment, especially number two, if it doesn't have a date in place to be ready as soon as possible, particularly for this next school year. And I will see my time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John. And again, we will try when we get to board discussion to address a lot of the questions that are coming up and try to be as clear as possible in whatever decisions we ultimately make and whatever point in the process we're in. But again, appreciate the questions that are being raised. Next, we'll go to Thomas Watson. Thomas?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you for having us. So I am one of those extremely, arguably, ridiculously...
Thomas, do you mind starting just with your name and address for the record?
Yes, of course. I'm sorry. I should know that by now. Anyway, my name is Tom Watson, and I live on Pine Street in Portland's West End. And my general thesis is that I think we ought to all take a step back from taking any action. And I say that because I'm the very lucky parent of 3 kids, one of whom, Rose, was the president of the student council at Portland High School this past year. And this next year, my daughter Audrey has assumed that position, or was voted in, and now she is the president of the student council for this coming year. And Rose, I don't know, 4 or 5 months ago, spoke before the board and spoke in favor of having Officer Bennis remain. It is striking to me that no one has reached out to these student leaders, both of whom supported Officer Bennis staying there, who they very much liked, enjoyed, and felt brought a lot to the school and to the relationship between the police and the kids. And so we find the school board moving forward without talking to those young folks who are most involved in this, and specifically to these leaders, these young leaders. And that is somewhat disheartening, but I understand we're all trying to do the right thing. And so I would suggest that we hold off on any action till we actually talk to the kids. And in particular, those kids who are leaders, who are elected leaders. So that's it. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Tom. All right, so next we're going to Mackenzie O'Connor. And I want to, before we move on, Mackenzie, before you get started, I just want to once again just remind everyone that at this very moment, the public comment that we're asking for is on the amendment that Ms. Figdor is proposing, and the language is on the chat. After the board discusses and votes on this amendment, we will go back to the main motion, which will also include a period of public comment on what the resolution would look like at that point. So again, the public comment right now is for the amendment that Ms. Figdor has proposed. Mackenzie?
Thank you. My name is Mackenzie O'Connor, and I live at 54 Tremaine Street, and I hope to one day send my children to a Portland Public High School. I agree that the amendment is vague in how the funds will be reallocated, and I hope money is divested in further policing in our schools. But if you do move forward with the amendment, I would like to suggest revising the sentence. These revisions should prioritize voices of students of color, specifically students identifying as Black students are disproportionately affected by the presence of SROs in the school. Thank you.
Thank you, Mackenzie. Next, we're going to go to Madeline Goodman. And Madeline, before you get started, I just want to read off the next few names that are behind you. So after Madeline, we're going to Megan Lasalle, and then Liz Blackwell-Moore, and then Owen, and then we have Savannah Mirisola Sullivan. Okay, so Madeline.
Thank you. I came late because I finished up work late. And so I think I'm going to hold my comment for the actual comments around the resolution. I didn't realize this was about the amendment. So I will chime in at that point. Thank you.
Okay, so, excuse me. Okay, next, we're going to Megan Lasalle.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Megan Lasalle. I live at 22 Wordsworth Street in Portland. I do not have kids of my own, but there are many kids in my life who I love who attend Portland Public Schools, and I believe that all community members have a stake in the equitable and just governing of schools in our communities. And at the same time, students' voices must be at the center, so I'm here in support of students who have taken a lead on removing SROs from their schools. My comment is about the First Amendment about funding. I was concerned to hear the superintendent give the example of contracting with the police department for sporting events as an example of how the funding might be used for security. And I question if we acknowledge that the presence of police makes students, and especially Black students, less safe. I wonder why we would not understand that to also be the case at school events. And I would ask the board to consider making a commitment to not contract with police for any reason. I support previous commenter John Torsh's comments about the funding, about concern that funding would be diverted to subcontracting private security. And I also support the previous commenter Violet's suggestion for more specificity about directives for funding and prioritizing students' voices and shaping the policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. All right, let's go to Liz Blackwell-Moore.
Hello, my name is Liz Blackwell-Moore, and I live at 81 Old Birch Lane here in Portland. I have 2 children in the Portland Public Schools, and I am also a public health consultant. And I'm just calling to really comment on the First Amendment on funding. I have been doing a lot of work in schools for a while and one of the major pieces of research that was done more recently around what is the best ways to keep schools safe. There was a very large study done in which it was a meta-analysis, basically looking at all the research that's been done on school safety, and they found that schools with positive school climate and an integrated social emotional learning had much less reduced isolation, less verbal, physical, and cyberbullying, less sexual harassment, less negative relationships between students and teachers. They had less weapons use. So there was a much greater sense of safety when schools worked really hard at their school climate and integrating social emotional learning. So I guess I would suggest that if we're looking at where funding might go to improve school safety, you may want to consider adding in work on school climate and integrated social emotional learning, which I know is a part of Portland Promise, but just want to say it could be added in as a piece to that resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Next, Liz had, by the way, sent us a couple of links to some research through an email almost a week or 2 weeks ago, which I thought were really helpful. Maybe you guys can go back specifically on some of the comments that she made, which were, again, really helpful. All right, let's go to Owen.
Hello. Yeah, my name is Owen Wall. I live at 62 Washington Ave. And my comments have to do with a bunch of the issues that other people have brought up. And specifically with what you can do to eliminate these positions before the beginning of the school year, while also meaningfully providing some kind of like plan immediately to provide like an atmosphere of safety and a response plan for like when incidents are going to be dealt with in a fair way and stuff while you work on figuring out what you can do with all of the funding. And I would suggest that you could hire people who are not specifically school counselors or teachers or anything, who are just possibly people with a background in clinical social work or something like that, to just be there in the school and to be the people that make the decisions about when the police get called, and have training specific to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Owen. Next, let's go to Savannah Mirisola Sullivan. Savannah. Savannah, you are no.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go for it.
Sorry, Zoom is being crotchety. My name is Savannah Mirasola Sullivan. My pronouns are she and hers. I live on Wolcott Street in the Rosemont neighborhood, and I'm also a teacher with Portland Public Schools. I've also taught in Chicago, where, as Javier spoke to, there's a traumatic and violent relationship between schools and the police force. I'd like to directly thank the students who have spoken about their vision for their schools. I thought these students showed tremendous leadership tonight, and I'm so grateful that we do have student insight into this issue. One main goal of this resolution is to break one particular link in the school to prison pipeline. And I'm noticing that in the second resolution, or the second amendment of the resolution, it specifically says collaborating with law enforcement officials. So given that our goal is to break the link between school and prison, and that police operate as that link, I'd like to get clarity, if possible, on what the collaboration with law enforcement would look like within this resolution. It seems to me that collaborating with police officials could result in continued police presence in our schools, which we know will result in trauma for our Black students and students of color. So thank you for providing clarity on that.
Thank you, Savannah. Emily P., I still have you here on the queue. I'm not sure if you're able to unmute yourself or not. I'm a little bit lost at what we can do with Emily. I'm going to leave her there, and if she can unmute and speak, obviously we'll give her a chance, but I don't want to not go, she's at disregard. I'm going to wait. Let's go to Dana Collihan. I'm not doing a good job with last names today.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Dana.
Hi, my name is Dana Callahan. I live at 13 Hammond Street in Portland. I also don't have any children, but I do hope to have kids one day and to be able to send them to Portland Public Schools. I also have serious concerns about the vagueness of the amendments and the way that it creates a window to use funding to go back to the Portland Police Department. I want to recenter us in the demands that Black Lives Matter Portland called for on June 5th, one of which is specifically to the school board to remove SROs from the budget. This demand made its way into the resolution that you are talking about today. It's in paragraph 20. And I want to reiterate that giving any money to Portland Police goes against Black Lives Matter list of demands and the spirit of this paragraph. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. Okay, and last we're going to Lauren Sans, and there is no one else right now with their hand raised after Lauren.
Okay. Hi. This is actually Kate Vaughn. Lauren Sans is my partner. I'm using her computer. Sorry. My name's Kate Vaughn. I live at 339 Woodford Street. And I also just wanted to underscore concerns about possible, the funding saved from not having SROs in the schools still making its way back to the Portland Police Department. So really against that, and would love some clarifying of that language, and agree that an earlier someone made a comment who is a staff person at Portland High School saying that, you know, we need more staff in our schools, and particularly Black and brown staff. And so I support what I think the spirit of these amendments are, but I do really hope for more clarity. As the person before me said, we're seeing really clear demands from Black Lives Matter locally and the movement for Black Lives nationally. And it's really important that we don't willfully misunderstand or water down those demands. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. I see there's one more person that raised their hand, so we're gonna go to Jeff Irish. Jeff?
Hi, you there?
Yes, we are. We can hear you. Go for it.
All right. I think I'll keep it really quick. What's very clear in some of this discussion is that...
Jeff, do you mind just giving us your name and address first?
Yep, sorry. Jeff Irish, 135 Curtis Road. What's clear in some of the discussion is that we're proposing an amendment to a resolution that is void solutions. I think it's worthwhile for the board to consider and the superintendent to consider is implementing a solution before we remove funding. And I'll reserve the rest of my time for the comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. All right, so we have Amanda Atkinson-Lewis.
Hi there. My name is Amanda Atkinson-Lewis. I live at 18 Bancroft Street in Portland, and I'm also a school staff at King Middle School. I just want to start by thanking the superintendent and Roberto and the members of the board for your leadership on this issue. I fully support the removal of SROs, and in terms of the amendment about the funding, I wanted to encourage that as part of the exploration of where the funding would go, that the school district also look into crisis response programs that are located in our community to be a part of our new way of providing safety in our schools. And also encouraging that even when a decision is made in either direction this evening, that a part of the ongoing work into the school year is to make a concerted effort to elicit feedback from students about their thoughts and feelings of this, and specifically Black students and Indigenous students and other students of color. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amanda. All right, so we have no one else waiting to speak on this amendment, so we're going to close public comment and then bring it back to the board for further discussion. Okay, you see a couple of hands just came up on the attendees list. I want to, before I go to them, because I do want to allow them to speak, I just want to again reiterate that we're taking public comment right now on the amendment that's on the floor on Ms. Victor's amendment. And after we finish this, and after the board now has their discussion, we will go back to the main motion, at which time the same process will repeat itself. Questions, public comment, discussion. So again, we're going to close public comment as I see those hands went back down, and we're going to bring it back down. Excuse me, we're going to bring it back to the board. I see Ms. Victor with her hand raised. Ms. Victor?
Yes, thank you, Chair. My question is whether at this point, my amendment was incorporating language recommended by the superintendent into the underlying resolution. And I think at this point, we have heard some really good clarifying suggestions and changes. And I'm wondering if at this point I can suggest some small changes that I would like to make in the amendment.
Can I, before we go there, just because we heard public comment on something that's on the floor, before we change that, I want to hear other board members if they have anything else to say. I personally have something to say in regards to some of the comments and questions that were made. So if you don't mind, Ms. Victor, before we go there, just to kind of go around the room, and then if we need to change anything, we can.
Could I articulate the changes that I would like to make? Or you don't want to get there yet?
I was going to say, I don't see any hands raised from the board. And like I said, I had a few comments, so I'm fine with you articulating what changes you were thinking about.
Okay, thank you. On the first whereas clause, where we talk about what to do with the savings from eliminating the SRO program, I would like to just tighten up that language so that it says, be it further resolved that the superintendent use funds saved by the elimination of the SRO program to support safety needs in line with the equity and whole student goals in the Portland Promise, staff training, and unmet equity needs with funds prioritized to be used at Portland High School and Deering High School. This money cannot be used for the Portland Police Department. And I will put that into the chat.
Yeah, please do that and just let me read it before I say anything about it.
Roberta, I have a point of clarification. The board didn't have an opportunity to comment on the first set of amendments, and now we're getting new amendments. So it's getting a little confusing because I have amendments as well, and it seems like we're continuing to go with the same person for amendments. So.
Right, and so that's what I said a moment ago before Ms. Victor proposed this, and that's that I wanted us to discuss the amendment as she has proposed it before we changed it anymore. So I'm going to leave that in the chat, but I'm not going to suggest that I don't think she meant that as a motion right now, and there's no second right now. So I think I'm going to take that as a comment from her, and I'm going to move us along. And then eventually, when we do get to the point of voting on the amendment, we'll be really specific about what language we're indicating in there.
Right.
I see Mr. Burke with his hand raised.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Superintendent, for your careful thought and diligence in coming for tonight's meeting. I'm curious. I know you don't have all the details, Superintendent, but I'm curious. It seems like there's a little bit of sequencing here in terms of doing some initial analysis, like you talked about with like sporting events and that sort of thing, to kind of direct initial thinking where our gaps are, and then the duration of the process for the full policy review. So I'm curious if you could say more about the sequencing on those things. In particular, how long do you feel like, could we put a time stamp on when either piece of that work would be completed? And that's my primary question right now.
It's hard for me to actually put a definitive timeline on it, as I think you are a member of the policy committee, so you know that we discussed moving forward with this work regardless of whether or not this resolution passes. So I'm committed to the policy work needs to happen regardless. And, that isn't, it's 9 policies. And we're committed to an inclusive process. In Ms. Thompson's resolution, I think she proposed that it take a year to do the review of the policies, and at that point, I mean, for a different purpose, it's the same concept in terms of looking at all of the policies, but it's then to decide whether to keep or remove the SRO. So I think that to me, a process like this one minimally is going to take 6 months to a year in order to be able to do it well. If you think at, the sexual harassment policy has been in the works for about 6 months now. Now, granted that we've been thrown off stride a bit because of the school closures. But those types of engagement processes are lengthy and take a significant amount of energy to work through. So I would not want to say that it's going to take anything less than 6 months and possibly a year to be able to review all of those policies. And as the board knows, we are reviewing all of our policies. We've commissioned and have received an equity review of our policies and are committed to looking at, a significant number of policies, some of which are the ones that are that involve law enforcement, like JIC, but and the cameras policy and things along those lines. So those were already on the docket to be done. So we would need to move forward with that. In terms of the use of the funds, some of those things, like the use of some of the funds to contract with the Portland Police Department, or if, for whatever reason they can't do it with any other law enforcement unit, to have security at our school events is, with all due respect to folks that have said none of that money goes back to the police department. If it's not that money, it's some other money, but we have to have that level of security at those events. Those are not school events. They're attended by students, but they're also attended by members of the public. There are lots of things that happen at sporting events. I don't think that anybody would want to go to a Celtics game or something along those lines and know that there's no security there. And so it's the same thing, albeit at a smaller scale in our events. So we absolutely need to have some ability to contract with law enforcement or security of some kind to be at those events. That's not, there is no intent to, subvert the intent of the resolution and, sort of then go and hire private security for our schools, other than for those specific events that rise to the need to have police. In terms of the other, uses of the funds, there are specific things that we have identified as a district that, are not currently funded and are, specifically responses to, how do we avoid having to call the police? And so those are things like district-wide de-escalation, training and support for all of our staff, implementing restorative practices as opposed to traditional punitive practices, integrating trauma-sensitive practices, integrating professional development around implicit bias and how that plays into behavioral norms and expectations, and addressing our over-referral of students to special education for behavioral reasons. So those are all things that are currently on our list of things that we need to do that could be advanced with some of these resources. But for me to say that it's only going to be at Deering or Portland, I can't say that, because those practices need to be across the district. And, whereas I do believe that some of those investments, some of the expenses of contracting with police to monitor those events, those are, Portland High School and Deering High School have the largest, events and sporting events. And so, that money would definitely go to those purposes. But some of those other things that I just, ticked off are things that would be district-wide.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for naming the process of policy development that's underway for other issues and that would be used here, because for those that aren't familiar, it is very rigorous. It involves deep stakeholder engagement. Even though I see law enforcement named here, it wouldn't be centered in law enforcement. It would be centered in our students, absolutely. And that might not be things that people would understand from outside of that process, but having been part of the harassment policy development and seeing it firsthand, it is the best way to do policy development. And I agree that this is what this should be dealt with too.
Can I piggyback on that? Because I know that...
Yeah, and I'll yield Roberto after Javier comments.
One of the speakers also talked about student engagement. I think that, the recommended language talks about prioritizing students, and actually prioritizing students of color in that policy development and their voices. We have, over the past couple of years, had a number of incredibly thoughtful and articulate students, including Joseph Inabanza, who many of you know because he served as a student board rep, who have done their capstone projects around police and community relations. And so, we have tremendous student leaders who are, extremely thoughtful and have looked very deeply at these issues that we will definitely tap into to help with this work. And so the fact that we haven't spoken to a specific person doesn't mean that we're not speaking to students, and, consistent with the language that we've put in here, want to prioritize the voices of those students who are most affected by the inequities in the current system.
Thank you, Superintendent. I want to, before I go to other board members on the attendees list, I see who I'm thinking is our Mr. Daly, our Deering High School AD. And so given that we were talking about sporting events and he had his hand raised, I think he could add some insight. So Michael, can you unmute yourself?
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I would just, I actually didn't mean to raise my hand. That happened accidentally, so I apologize for that. But I would echo the superintendent's comments about providing a certain amount of public safety at our sporting events for athletics in Portland Public Schools, and what he had talked about and arranging for that for our, the groups that come in, whether it's the public or our students, alumni, and parents. I think that's necessary. So I look forward to what those policies will end up being and then implementing them, and I appreciate the time.
Right. I appreciate you being here today, and again, your input is always appreciated. Let's go to Ms. Trevorrow. You had your hand raised. Do you still have something you wanted to share?
I think my questions got answered. I was just going to ask about the need for security at events, such as sporting events, and I think that got answered. So, but just to kind of clarify then, it sounds like from your answer, Superintendent, that Ms. Figdor's new proposed language that's not officially on the table yet it wouldn't work for that. It would be prohibitive of having security at. So, okay. Just wanted to clarify that. Thanks.
That is my understanding of it, and I would be concerned about that.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Rowe. Ms. Morioni?
Thank you, Chair. And thank you very much to the superintendent for his thoughtful process and thinking through things and presenting them tonight. I just had a question for the superintendent with regards to what he's presented. How much did you consider or thought about maintaining our SROs through the 6 months or the year until we had completed the comprehensive collaborative approach you're talking about with stakeholders? And I'm just wanting to know more about your thought process and as to why you're supportive of removing SROs before there's a clear policy changes and plan in place. Thank you.
I don't want to say always, but for the past 3 months probably 6 months have been talking about the fact that, as we engaged in this conversation around SROs, that one of the first things that became obvious to me was that we needed to actually adopt a policy around SROs, which was never adopted by the board when the board entered into this MOU with the Portland Police Department. It was, presented by the attorneys to the administration at the time, and for whatever reason, it never got put in place. So from the very beginning, I've been aware of the need to address the policies more broadly. So that sort of saying and institutionalizing through the resolution that we need to do that is something that I believed in, and we talked with the policy committee about it in May and offered a path forward for doing that regardless of this. I think I tried to explain in my remarks how I've come to look at the SRO situation, and the reason that I am supporting the removal is, again, not an indictment of the work of our current SROs, but in this moment of reckoning with whether we are a more just institution that is truly living a commitment, a verbal commitment to equity. I think that we are prioritizing order over student learning, and we are prioritizing the safety of some over the trauma of others. And it's in that context that I believe that we need to move away from the SRO program at this point and begin to do this other work that we need to do regardless.
Okay, thank you.
Atkinson.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to the superintendent and everyone else in the public and on the board who's spoken on this. I just have a small clarifying question. You mentioned specifically sporting events, and I'm wondering about dances. I'm sorry to go into such detail, but I know that that's another place where law enforcement is sometimes engaged for security purposes.
And that's why I did not specify sporting events in the language. There are activities. Dances is a great example. Plays, other large events. Graduation ceremonies and things along those lines, where security presence is often needed.
Thank you.
Ms. Bondo?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Superintendent. I just have just a little bit of clarification question around the funding. If you maybe I missed that when you explained it earlier on the safety and programming needs, then those funds. Then if I try to understand the way you said is that you try to. So those funds for you is better to leave accessible, to try to fund some of the needs may come out not only specifically on those both high schools, and maybe just investing on more equitable needs around safety or programming, or just how you try to guide those fundings. That's why I just want to have a specific details. Are those funding, if we leave that one broad open, what's the specific strategy that you have for safety or programming needs?
I've tried to outline some of them, and I'll do that again. So de-escalation training for all of our staff.
Okay.
Restorative practices, trauma-sensitive practices, training on implicit bias, working on changing our referral of students to special education. Those are district-wide needs.
Okay.
Building a core of police officers that understand school policies and school law, understand youth development, and are able to be the resource that our staff needs to determine, for example, if this incident that occurred is something that rises to the level of criminal activity, and not roll the dice that the person walking in the door is going to think that it is criminal activity and that we're going to have somebody who has a more thoughtful approach to it. So investing in working on that with the police department is something that as an administration we would find of great value. And, in our discussions on this issue of the SROs, one of our principals talked about the fact that, they would love to have somebody that is that thought partner in those instances instead of having to call 911. And so that's, I think, what I'm referring to. And then there are structures, and I mentioned this in my remarks, for example, at Deering in this past year, we implemented the dean's system. So we had, a teacher from the school released one period during the day to, serve as a sort of a triage around the multiple issues that might come up over the course of the day. And, that's somebody that is in the building, has a relationship with students and knows, knows the school culture and knows school policies. And so something like that may or may not be the kind of support that would make sense at Portland High School. I don't know that today. I know that it's worked at Deering and that they are committed to maintaining it. And so those are the kinds of things, those types of structures that working with the administration and the administration working with their staff, we can identify and devote those resources to as we find that that's the best, that those are the best.
And earlier you mentioned about, I think for the person who's leading the equity strategy is not being paid by, I think his salary being paid by grant, or we don't have something really concrete to hold his salary. So you think, because when you just mentioned the de-escalation, everything needs to be happen. We need somebody to be able to coordinate all those efforts that we want to accomplish. So are you thinking
at this point, we're not proposing
to link some of those funds to
Ms. Bondo, where your connection, Ms. Bondo, your connection started to break up. We couldn't hear the last few minutes.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
I think a little bit better. Yeah, if sometimes when we bring our video down and just use the audio, it helps. Maybe you want to try that.
Okay. About now.
Good.
Can you hear me without seeing me? That's fine. Yeah, okay. All right. So what I was saying is that you mentioned about somebody, then we're supposed to have to coordinate those everything that you mentioned as a programming need, then we need as a de-escalation, the training, everything. And if I really well understood is that the person is being paid by grant. So are you thinking maybe to relocate some of the funds? No, I see you shaking your head. So it's not that part.
No.
Okay. Right. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
All right. I want to just share a couple of thoughts before we move forward. So one of the things that the superintendent said in his initial remarks was he spoke of the level of engagement that the board has had in this issue, and he related that to, or rather he compared that to probably the deepest that this board has engaged with any issue over a long period of time. And I know that I've had, over the last year, many conversations with him about this, and I appreciate the way that he has progressed in his thinking and where he arrived today. I think he has demonstrated to the board an alignment in thinking about this issue that represents the sentiments that those of us that are supporting the resolution intend. And so while I hear the concerns for the lack of clarity or the broad language in the resolution on the amendment, I trust that the superintendent understands that we want to have a clear distinction between the police department and the schools during the school day in our buildings. But I also want to allow him to continue to explore the rest of his journey progressing in how he sees his district function under that scenario, right, without policing. And given that this is a new experience for all of us, I do appreciate the flexibility that this would give him. And again, I want to underscore, I appreciate that flexibility and feel comfortable with it because of what I've seen of him through this process over the last year. And for that alone, and without questioning the people in the community who brought those concerns up, because I think they're very legitimate, I want to speak in support of the superintendent and tell him that I'm comfortable giving him that level of flexibility that the language on the amendment has right now before what was briefly suggested as a further amendment. So I'll leave that. I see Ms. Victor has her hand raised, and then if we can then move real quick to vote on the amendment and then get back to the main motion, because I know that we have some other things lined up for discussion. So Ms. Victor?
Thank you. I agree with the chair's comments that I am confident that the superintendent is going to spend this money in a way that moves us away from relying on the police department and law enforcement in the way that we have. However, I guess I would like, I'm going to post some updated language and see if this threads the needle to capture what the superintendent is describing as how we would use the language, and it still has that flexibility, and also takes into account many of the comments the very good comments that the public raised about ensuring that we are clear in terms of our intent. I don't think, if this is in line with what the superintendent, how the superintendent wants to use the money, then clarity is a good outcome. So, Mr. Superintendent, I posted the first change to the change to the, I guess, second resolve clause. I posted that in the chat, and I'm wondering what you think of that language. I can read it. Be it further resolved that the superintendent use funds saved by the elimination of the SRO program to support security at large events, safety needs in line with the equity and whole student goals in the Portland Promise prioritized at Portland High and Deering High, district-wide staff training and development, and unmet equity needs of the district. So my question is, does that accomplish what you would see the needs that you see need to be filled with the money?
It would. I have no objections to that. I just, from a parliamentary perspective, am concerned about the fact that it sends us to voting down the previous amendment, then having this amendment entered, and then having public comment on this amendment, then coming back and doing this all over again. So if you trust that that is the intent and, of what we are, what I'm proposing, then, I would beg you to just go with it instead of, having us in this spiral. But otherwise, I have no objections with that and would be perfectly happy to commit to you that that is how I will spend the money.
And can I follow that up by saying that the superintendent's work will not happen in a vacuum, and we will be there, be it through the policy committee, and ultimately we are the deciding body. So a lot of these changes, he's not, and particularly knowing that this is this heightened level of interest in this, we're clearly going to be involved in those. So I'm going to recommend for Ms. Victor that we not suggest that as an amendment at this time, so that procedurally we can get a vote on the initial resolution. So if Ms. Victor, I'm sort of kind of laying it on you heavy, if you're okay with that.
Yes, definitely. I do wonder if on the second clause, if we could add a date certain in there, that would be a small friendly amendment.
That changes the amendment totally.
Okay. Well, I heard the superintendent say that it would take 6 months to a year. I'm as chair of the policy committee. I've been, very involved in the sexual harassment working group, and know that a meaningful process does take some time. And I think what we all know is needed is a meaningful process. So with that change as well, I understand the superintendent's intent. And so I'm fine moving ahead with the amendment as initially stated. Again, these are recommended changes by the superintendent to the underlying resolution.
Okay. So what I want us to do now is to take a vote on the amendments. And right before we do that, just want to check real quick across the room. Is everyone clear on what we're voting what we're about to vote on right now? Okay, so I see no hands raised. So, Superintendent, can we do a roll call? And I'll set us up before you do that. We're going to take a roll call vote on the amendment Ms. Victor suggested, which is taking the superintendent's recommendations and adding it to the resolution. And I think we've all been able to, by now, read and understand the language that's on the chat room. Superintendent, can you call the roll, please?
Yes. Mr. Atkinson?
Yes.
Mr. Balfons?
Yes.
Ms. Bondell?
Yes.
Mr. Burke?
Yes.
Ms. Figdor?
Yes.
Ms. Morioni?
This is just for the amendments, right? Yes.
Ms. Thompson?
No.
Ms. Trevorrow?
Yes.
Ms. Brown?
No.
Ms. Yangala?
Yes.
And Chair Rodriguez?
Yes. So the amendment passes with the 8-1 vote, and the two students had a split vote, 1-1. So we're back to the main motion. And Ms. Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make an amendment, please.
Do you want to do you want to speak on it? Excuse me. Do you have a second? Do we have a second for an amendment? Do you want to speak on it before we get a second, so we know what we're seconding?
I think the resolution that I put forth after working with some community members, teachers, and students is the resolution titled Resolution Promoting Equity in School Climate and Discipline by Exploring the Efficacy of School Resource Officers Through a Comprehensive Process Informed by Recommendations of the Cutler Institute Report on School-Based Policing in Maine.
And do we have a second? Mr. Balfons? Ms. Thompson, please, do you mind speaking on the motion? And go ahead, you have the floor.
Great. Well, first and foremost, as we did on the other resolution, I'd like to read it for the record, as well as for those at home, what the resolution is in front of you.
Yeah, and just to let everyone know that it is also on board docs as part of the package, so that people can also see it there. And I don't know how Zoom savvy you are, but if you want to copy and paste it on the chat, that might be.
I only do one task at a time here, so I'm going to read. So I read the title already. So, whereas school administered surveys, along with an overwhelming majority of speakers at the May 19th, 2020 school board meeting, who we know to be relevant stakeholders in Portland public schools, and particularly in Portland's high schools, demonstrated overwhelming support for retaining our school resource officers, or at least studying their efficacy. Whereas the board revisited this topic with a resolution to remove school resource officers offered after the conclusion of the school year, eliminating an authentic opportunity for student voice to be heard, particularly Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, and low-income students. Whereas Portland Public Schools has a relationship with the Cutler Institute, we should strive to meet the principles by Portland Empower to ensure that student and parent voices are reflected in policy and practice within Portland Public Schools. Students and parents are experts on what they need to be successful in education, and our youth engagement partners and parent engagement partners are critical assets to education reform in Portland and beyond. Whereas having an SRO present on school premises eliminates the necessity of police calls being made from schools, further helping to protect confidentiality for students who may be involved in criminal activity that has risen to a level requiring law enforcement intervention. Whereas SROs currently serve as mentors to students, including BIPOC students, and provide cost-effective navigation of the juvenile justice system, which is particularly valuable for those low socioeconomic students who have limited resources. Whereas Board Policy GBB, staff involvement in decision-making, states that it shall be the policy of the school committee to encourage employee participation in decision-making within the school department. However, the expedited process and timeline in which the board engaged did not allow for this voice, and instead has left a proposal that was made by people who will remain unaffected regardless of the outcome. Whereas the Portland Promise commits us to goals of equity and the whole student, and equity is best achieved by empowering marginalized groups, BIPOC, by soliciting and amplifying their voices rather than the majority speaking for them. Whereas creating a comprehensive process, much like that outlined in the report from the Cutler Institute, to include an at least quarterly audit of the efficacy of the school resource officer model that would confidentially allow the voices of our most important stakeholders, students of color and educators of color, to be heard, empowering them and further helping the district to realize the equity and whole student goals from the Portland Promise. Whereas students, teachers, and school staff deserve safe, quality schools that enable students to thrive, which thus far has been accomplished through school policing, with its community building, as is evidenced by media coverage of both community building and school safety achievement. Whereas there are incidents, including in our own district and nationally, where school resource officers have improved real or perceived school safety, and no plan exists to address these issues should the resolution to remove SROs be adopted. Whereas student voice offered at school board meetings and through petition finds that Portland students do not report feeling intimidated by police in their schools, and those students feel some reassurance that there is someone there in case of an emergency, and they do believe that an SRO would keep them safe in an emergency. Whereas protocol in our district dictates that the SROs do not discipline students, and rather that it is done solely by school administrators, a point that will help our district more accurately address issues of equity and discipline and begin the reformation work necessary to correct those. Whereas the presence of SROs in schools poses no more grave a threat to students' right to privacy and that of their families than the dozens of cameras already placed in each school. Whereas allowing students an opportunity to be exposed to law enforcement in a controlled environment will help to reframe their view of law enforcement as a resource to help meet their needs for physical and emotional security, as well as provide a means of enhancing mutual trust and understanding. Whereas Portland Public Schools is far below recommended ratios of student support professionals to the student body for school counselors, social workers, and psychologists, yet resolution to remove SROs directed savings realized from removing SROs to these equity investments already proposed, none of which were social workers, school counselors, or psychologists. Whereas on June 9th, 2020, Black Lives Matter Portland, in order to dismantle the school to prison pipeline, called for the removal of police from school budgets, and national movements making similar demands are accompanied by specific actions and suggestions for reform and reimagination rather than just removal. We support equity for our BIPOC attending our schools by amplifying and centering their voices to give them agency in this process. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Portland Board of Education directs the superintendent to act deliberately and with a sense of urgency to undertake a comprehensive process to include our most relevant stakeholders, our students and staff, sign a one-year extension of the current MOU, and at the conclusion of that study, and by July 1st, 2021, a determination to remove or amend the work of SROs will be made. And be it further resolved that because law enforcement in schools is only one piece of a much bigger issue around systemic racism in education, the superintendent must implement an action plan informed by the conclusions listed in the Cutler Report on School Board Policing in Maine, as well as a comprehensive review to examine all Portland schools' policies, practices, and curriculum for their impact on or contribution to systemic racism. So that's the resolution, and then I have comments as to the resolution here.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. So I'm going to, when
I'd like to speak to the motion first.
Pardon me?
I want to speak to the motion, so I read the resolution and I want to speak to why.
Oh, I thought that was the
Nope, that was the
sorry, you still have the floor, Ms. Thompson. Apologies.
Yep. Nope, that was just the resolution. So the resolution that you find in front of you this evening is a result of continued emails and calls to the board from the community at large, and specifically from students and staff of the Portland Public Schools concerned about the rush to remove the SROs without engagement, and that it has been done during the time when school has been released, and not to mention a worldwide pandemic. Many community members feel that the board is leaving out many who also care deeply for our listened to or heard. In our resolution, we are advocating for a more collaborative approach regarding the proposed removal of the school resource officers from Portland High School and Daring High School. We would like to take the time, while being deliberate and with a sense of urgency, to reassess the role of the SROs in our schools and develop a plan of action whether we retain the SROs or not. We also recognize there are many policies needing reforming related to our relations with the Portland Police Department. We want to work to reform these policies to disavow any racially or sexually motivated actions, and we want to do the work as a community. The resolution brought forward to remove the SROs forces the board to pick one side and reject the other, which will not resolve the debate. This new resolution creates a space to share common goals and work towards collaborative solutions using more information. This is consistent with all other decision-making. We all want physical and emotional safety for our students, and this resolution offers an opportunity to bring all stakeholders into a collaborative process. There is the feeling that the board is not acknowledging and honoring as well the petition to keep the SROs, which now has over 1,000 signatures from Portlanders. Why is their voice not worthy of considering a compromise resolution? We would like an inclusive process that honors student voice and feel this is a great learning and public policy opportunity for our students. This resolution would make sure that all students' voices are heard going forward in the reform and review of our SROs. We would like the district to strive to meet the principles adopted by Portland Empowered to ensure that students and parent voices are reflected in policy and practice within the Portland Public Schools. I want to mention too that Portland Empowered has not taken a position on this, so that is not to imply that they've endorsed for or against, so I want to make that clear. Students and parents are experts on what they need to be successful in education, and our youth engagement partners and parent engagement partners to education reform in Portland and beyond. Again, I'd like to mention that Portland Empowered has not taken a position on this issue. Community members are asking, when is the public participation and community conversation around SROs going to happen? We have an opportunity to have an exceptional model here in Portland. People move here from all over the country because Portland is exceptional and a great place to live. We would like to take a step back and do this the best way we can with all the tools we have in our toolbox. Again, we would like to move forward deliberately and with a sense of urgency to gather data and have a community conversation. We'd like to create a thoughtful, fair process. And I will close with thanking all of our students for and against this item. Both sides have been very brave to share their thoughts and advocate for their respective positions. And regardless of the result of this, I hope that they'll respect one another's opinions because we potentially may be going back to school in September, and they'll all come back together again, and we're one community. So I hope that that can be as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. So just real quick, I want to just pause here for a second before board members jump in. When Ms. Thompson shared this resolution and it was added to the package, the Cutler Institute researchers that because they're so heavily noted on the resolution, they wanted to just share their thoughts about it. So I want to allow an opportunity for that. And then also, as Ms. Thompson noted really clearly, that Portland Empowered is a big part of this work. And so I also know that Pius Ali, Councillor Pius Ali, is also interested in sharing a few words as well. So what I'm going to do is allow that to happen, and then after that, well, actually, first I'm going to go to Councillor Ali, and then I'm going to read the comments from Ms. Layton because she's actually on a flight right now, so she's not available. So I'm going to go to Pius first. Mr. Ali.
Thank you, Chair Rodriguez. Good evening, Chair Rodriguez, board members, and Superintendent Botana. My name is Pius Ali. I live at 184 Pearl Street. My son graduated from Casco Bay High School a few years ago, and my daughter is a rising junior at Portland High School. I am at large city councillor. However, tonight I am here as a staff member of Muskie School's Cutler Institute's program, cited in this particular resolution that you guys are going to deliberate on as Portland Empowered, youth engagement partner and parent engagement partners, respectively. For the record, as my friend and your colleague, Ms. Thompson, stated earlier, and as you, Board Chair Rodriguez, also stated, Portland Empowered is not taking any position for or against this specific resolution because we are a program of Muskie School and we are not allowed to take position on this. Now, having cleared that off the way, I want to make it clear that the issue of keeping or removing the SRO is not new to our students who are referred as youth engagement partners. They have been discussing this for some time now, probably since somewhere last year. And as some of you know, they hosted a community conversation with other young people about 10 days or so. And quite a number of school board members joined us. And I thank those who were able to join us that day to have a conversation with the students. The superintendent was there, so were some high school principals and other school leaders from Portland Public Schools. During that meeting, the students made it clear that they support removing SROs from their schools. It was not the focus of the conversation. It was a broader conversation on some things that the students want to discuss with the school leadership. You have a difficult task in front of you tonight. I wish you well. Thank you for your service and thank you for the opportunity to set this record straight and to address you. Good luck tonight. I'm here watching.
Thank you, Councillor Ali. And then before we move on, the Ms. Danielle Layton's statement, I'll just read it briefly. Dear members of Dear members of the board, while I hope to be able to call into the meeting tonight, I wanted to express my comments about both the resolution to discontinue the SRO program and the subsequent resolution to continue the program and evaluate it according to the recommendations outlined in the Cutler Institute's report, School-Based Policing on Maine, which I co-authored with my colleague, George Shaler. As you already know, I support the resolution to discontinue the SRO program. My support comes in part from my qualitative research with Maine students, which found that they experienced police presence in their schools with mixed reassurance and skepticism regarding their physical safety, misgivings due to their potential for SROs to escalate school disciplinary matters into law enforcement investigations, wariness about the differential impact for students of color, and intimidation from the armed authority that law enforcement represents. My support for the resolution also stems from my policy research on the deployment of SROs in Maine, which found that SRO programs in Maine are subject to the same pitfalls and and produce the same risk to students that they see in national research on school-based policing. SROs in Maine are liberally included in school matters without strong policy governing the boundaries of their role or ensuring the protection of students' rights, without adequate training to interact with youth, and without evaluation and oversight to hold the program accountable for its impact on youth of color, youth with disabilities, LGBTQ youth, youth who are economically disadvantaged, and youth who come from other marginalized communities. While the board may opt to continue the SRO program in Portland and simply take all the recommendations outlined in the Cutler report for how to mitigate the risk of embedding law enforcement in school, this would be a missed opportunity to take the most important recommendation from that report: invest in holistic and equitable school safety. There is a reason that invest in holistic school safety was listed in the top 2 recommendations in the Cutler report. In retrospect, it would have been clearer if we had titled the report Invest in Holistic and Equitable School Safety instead of Police. In Maine, if Maine took this one single recommendation to heart, it would alleviate the need to invest considerable resources into monitoring and mitigating the inherent and already well-documented risk and harms of embedding police into schools. The remaining recommendations were based in pragmatism, assuming that many schools would continue to deploy SROs regardless of the risk. These outline what must be done to keep students safe from law enforcement presence in their schools for as long as SRO programs continue to exist, but it should not be overlooked that these are no more than mitigating strategies. I would like to speak particularly to one belief or hope expressed by many proponents of the SRO program, and also name explicitly in the resolution to extend and evaluate the SRO program in Portland, namely that SROs facilitate a positive first experience of law enforcement. It is precisely for this reason that school-based policing has been a feature of community policing since the 1950s, to instill youth with positive regard for law enforcement, which would then translate into trust for law enforcement as those youth transition to adulthood. This intention for SROs to be the first positive interaction and instill trust for law enforcement is problematic because law enforcement is not a trustworthy institution for people of color, particularly for Black people. Less than a month ago, a 26-year-old First Nations woman was shot and killed by police during a wellness check on Wabanaki land in Edmonton, California, just over the border from Maine. Edmonton, Canada, just over the border from Maine. As we see locally and nationally, people of color have ample reason to distrust law enforcement. And it is therefore disingenuous to put police in schools with the express purpose of building trust with youth of color, knowing that those youth still have legitimate reason not to trust police outside of school. I encourage the board to discontinue the SRO program and reinvest the savings into more appropriate student support professionals, i.e. school counselors, social workers, credible messengers, mentors, coaches, nurses, and other school-based health and mental health professionals. These supports have been demonstrated to be effective in promoting student well-being, enhancing school safety, and improving school climate, whereas SROs have not. I hope the board will take this opportunity to divest from over-reliance on law enforcement and invest in holistic and equitable school safety. Yours sincerely, Danielle Layton.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I would ask if you have any more of those that they be part of public comment, because that before board even got to discuss, you've already discussed someone else's opinion, and that's
with the researcher
please. I appreciate Mr. Ali stepping in because I had talked to Portland Empowered, but what you just read was prior to board discussion, and that is a public comment that you just read in response in her saying she's against it. So you didn't allow any kind of conversation. Not that I believe 100% that this is going to pass anyway, but I would wish that we would follow process and allow people to speak their minds prior to reading comments from other people. So I'm just going to say that publicly because I think people in the community too are commenting to me saying, why is that allowed? So I just want to make that comment, and it's done now. So if we could just move into board discussion and go from there, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I tried, I announced it that I was going to read it. So I think, ahead of me reading it, I think it would have been probably more helpful to tell me that you felt that way. I said it, and then I had bias, and then I said I was going to do it.
Yes, and I didn't know there was a position, that we were taking a position on that. I thought the Cutler Institute was just going to respond to the report, but then you went on to talk about her personal opinion. So again.
Well, the Cutler Institute wrote the report. They're responding to yours, citing them for your resolution.
Thank you.
So do we have any questions from other board members? Mr. Burke?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm curious, Member Thompson, if you understand that the Cutler report disagrees with this resolution, and that's what that email was about, saying that we missed the central point and recommendation of it.
The teachers that were with us had read the Cutler Institute report, so I believe that parts of it they felt were in support of having a conversation around before removing SROs. So I can't go line by line, but I think Mr. Rodriguez announced where their position is. But again, there are parts of that report that we took, as well as the educators took, to state that they were not advocating for the removal per se of the SROs. So that was our take on it. So.
Do we have any other questions? Okay, seeing none, we're going to go to public comment for the amendment that's on the floor, which is the resolution that Ms. Thompson read a moment ago. Real quick, before we go to comment for that, I'm going to reread our public comment rules. Okay. Any person wishing to address the school board shall be recognized by the chair and come forward to the microphone, state his or her name and address before speaking. Speakers must address all comments and questions to the chair, and each person may speak for up to 3 minutes for each agenda item. And persons wishing to speak for more than 3 minutes on any item shall request that the board vote on an extension of time. If we have, like I said earlier before, if we have an extended period of public comment, I may ask that we limit everyone to the initial 3 minutes, and the board can decide on that at the time that comes up. Speakers may indicate support for a previous speaker's comments, but are asked to not be repetitious of comments already made to the board in the interest of the most efficient use of time. No complaints or allegations will be allowed in public concerning any staff member or any person connected with the school district. Persons present at the board meeting are requested not to applaud. This is again intended for when we're meeting in person, or otherwise express approval or disapproval of any statements made or actions taken by the board. The primary purpose of the meeting is for the board to conduct its business as charged by law. Spontaneous discussion as well as disorder and disruption prevent the board from doing its work and will not be permitted. So I'm going to call the names of the people on the attendees list, and then I'll start my clock. All right, we're going to start with Michael Khabib.
Thank you, Chair Rodriguez. I'd like to start by commending Board Member Thompson for having the courage to bring forth a resolution. You are clearly swimming against the tide. That's what I do for my day job, and I commend you for your courage. I should have said I am policy counsel for the ACLU of Maine. I live in Portland on Brackett Street. I want to turn the board's and listeners' attention to what I and Danielle Layton and George Taylor consider the most thorough study on students' experiences with the SRO program in Portland, Maine. And that's Danielle Layton's They're Just Like There, Student Experiences with School Resource Officers. She finds in that study that some students view SROs with skepticism and intimidation. About a third of the students she interviewed were students of color. She quotes students in that study who describe a school fight that ends up in court. She quotes students who describe the shame and stigma of being criminalized for this developmentally appropriate and predictable behavior. She shows that SROs have been a source of profound harm for some Portland students. Now, I had the privilege of speaking with the researcher, Danielle Layton, who wrote the Cutler Institute study. George Taylor was actually just the supervisor. Danielle Layton did all the legwork. And she told me that in her professional opinion, not in her personal opinion, but in her professional opinion, the Cutler Institute report actually goes in the direction of supporting the first resolution, not Board Member Thompson's resolution. She specifically thinks that the SRO program in Portland should end, and that would benefit the most vulnerable and the most marginalized students. And those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Next, we're going to go to Jay Norris.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, is that John Dow?
Yes.
Right.
Good afternoon, or good evening. My name is John Norris. I live at 75 Bayview Drive. I'm a member of the Portland High School class of 2020 and the former Portland High School student representative to the board. Formerly in the discussions involving student body cam, or excuse me, SRO body cams, I think it would have been earlier in 2019. I supported the SRO program, and I think recent events have made me come to realize that was possibly the wrong stand to make. And I'm sorry if I'm getting a little bit off the amendment topic, but I have to go soon, so I kind of just wanted to get off what I had to say. So I believe that, yes, the SROs should be removed. And I think the Cutler Institute report, after rereading it, I think it does point to that conclusion, and to us hopefully finding a better solution and a more holistic solution based on the best practices recommended therein. However, I believe a healthy medium could be found between our two resolutions tonight, namely the fact that our current resolution hopes to, or the one mentioned by Member Figador, hopes to immediately eliminate that position. However, I don't believe that that would be wise, especially considering coming into the next year. I believe that, especially at Portland High School, I remember the SRO wears a lot of different hats. And although that is something that we don't necessarily want to have, as it was pointed out in the report, it is something that exists and we can't ignore it. And to immediately remove all those roles that SRO takes would put an unnecessary strain on the administration of the school, the teachers, the administrators, and that would just boil down to the students. I don't believe it is a rational decision to immediately remove the SROs. I believe a healthy medium can be found in perhaps combining the two with a commitment to remove the SROs in 2021 or later down the line, but only after a well thought out policy-based holistic solution can be found. I don't think that immediately removing the SROs will be beneficial to anybody, especially the students we think we are going to help by doing it.
Thank you, John Dow. Good to hear and see you again. All right, you take care, bud.
Yes, thank you.
All right, next we're going to go to Eileen DaPonte.
Hi, my name is Eileen DuPont. I live at 133 Deepwood Drive in Portland. I teach math, and I'm the math team coach at Portland High School. I'm also the parent of a PHS grad class of 2011. I fully support this amended resolution, and I'd like to take this opportunity to commend the two students, Ashley and Gabby Daniels, whose passionate yet respectful civic engagement helped bring this resolution to fruition. In doing so, they have had to tolerate ugly personal attacks on the social media page of one of our school board members from people that don't even know them and have little connection to our schools. But these two young adults bravely carry on, and I am so proud of them. This amended resolution is not at odds with what was put forth at the June 17th meeting. It does not necessarily call for keeping SROs. Instead, it directs the superintendent to undertake a comprehensive process that includes students and staff, our most relevant stakeholders, to study this situation and then make a determination to remove or amend the work of SROs. This is thoughtful, reasonable, and inclusive. If this amended resolution doesn't pass, you are telling our young people that their voices do not count. You are telling our hardworking staff that all the equity work that we do through courses in race, poverty, and language impact awareness doesn't matter. You are telling us that we have no seat at the table and have instead been outmaneuvered by ultra-competent politicians masquerading as caring school board members. After listening to the public comments at the June 17th meeting, it is obvious that there are passionate, heartfelt opinions on both sides of having police officers in schools. But the common theme was this: we want all students and staff to feel safe in school. I believe we can achieve this without divide and conquer politics. PPS staff and students work with each other every day and have strong relationships. Our staff goes through continuous training to confront our biases and to understand and dismantle systemic racism. In fact, I highly recommend that school board members avail themselves of the same amazing courses, workshops, and book groups that we participate in. We have the expertise and relationships to craft and implement equitable safety plans that are best for all. I urge you to pass this amended resolution that calls for an inclusive process with the entire PPS community, and I thank you for the time.
Thank you. Next, we're going to go to Stacy.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, my name is Stacy Hung. I live on Summit Street in Portland, and I have 2 kids in the Portland schools, one of which will be a freshman in the fall. I'm here to give my support for this new amendment for the resolution. I've been hearing a lot about people talking about this Cutler Institute, or it's been presented to us today, and I'd like to point out that the Cutler report done by Danielle Layton, as well as their Just Like Their report that she also gave as sort of your data or inspiration to the school board for your original resolution, states exactly this. This report does not assess the impact of SROs on students. To truly gauge the impacts of SROs, further research needs to focus on those most impacted: students, parents, and school personnel. Only with the inclusion of these voices, as well as the empirical data from law enforcement, schools, and juvenile justice systems, can a fully informed public conversation begin to address the key questions regarding deployment of SROs. In her single report done by herself, she states, 12 of the 17 youth interviewed for this study were white, and considering that youth of color experience harsher school discipline and more law enforcement contact than their white peers, there needs to be further inquiry into the experiences of youth of color concerning police presence at school. The original resolution presented on June 16th does not allow for any more research to be done, as their sources recommend. In fact, the school board member who wrote the original resolution, who somehow disappeared during this meeting, turned the issue from concerns over body cams into unsupported conclusions that our students of color are intimidated by SROs being in the building, when in fact many students of color have spoken out against this theory. Their voices are not being heard, nor have the voices of parents or teachers who work with these students and whose lives are most impacted. The Cutler report gives amazing ways to create hard data to find out if either theory is correct. Students are either intimidated or they're not, or is there a pipeline to juvie or is there not? The data is not collected, so how could you vote yes or no without the information needed to make the best choice for our students and staff working with these schools? Cutting the SROs would be a tragedy done only for optics and an agenda not supported by the community. If you look at the 2 petitions that are out there, you've got 1,000 people for this and 1,000 people against it. That tells me more work needs to be done before any decision can be made. So therefore, I support the newest amendment, which gives us time to collect data to support this theory that is going around on either side. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy. Okay, next we're going to go to Olivia Bean.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, my name is Olivia Dean. I live at 37 Casco Street in Portland, and I'm a teacher at Portland High. Most importantly, I'm a Black teacher at Portland High. And I've talked a lot about this issue with a lot of people in a lot of places. And my frustration is that there are lots of people saying what students of color and teachers of color feel. And of those people, very few of them are of color. There's also been talk about students of color and teachers of color distrusting police, but it's just, that's one institution. Schools are not a trustworthy organization either. And so while I would support the removal of SROs, I think it's valuable to think about, even if it's less than a year, spending some time creating a concrete plan of what you plan to do afterwards. The idea of sprinkling the money around the district for training is nice in theory, but you're taking away a staff member who supports currently students of color. That may not be the right thing for him to be doing, but that's his current job. So by removing him, you're removing a resource from kids you didn't really hear that much from. And so removal of the SRO is a great idea, but there needs to be an actual concrete plan that people can read, because the school system is not any more trustworthy than the police, and that's the reality of this. Thank you. I'm done with my time.
Thank you, Olivia. Next, we're going to go to Tristan Cross.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
My name is Tristan Krause, and I live on Summit Street in Portland. Today, Jesse Lewis would have been celebrating his 12th birthday. However, he was murdered when he was 6 years old at Sandy Hook Elementary School, along with 27 others, at a school that did not have an SRO. If we truly want reform, then we all have to listen to each other's point of view and work together. Every single one of us listening now wants what's best for our youth. Let's do it right. Let's take our time. My parents, cousins, siblings, and myself all attended Portland Public Schools. My children now attend, with one going into high school in the fall. I've loved this district. I did not care for my SRO when I was in high school, but that was because he always tried to stop my friends and I from skipping school in the middle of the day to go swimming. Besides that, I heard he was really nice. Let's teach our children and youth that in America, police are here to help us keep us safe. I know that's not the case in some countries, but it is here. We can't make a decision to remove safety from our schools during the recent crisis. Please don't base your decision on recent events or a fear that you will be identified as a racist yourself. You're not a racist. I'm not. The vast majority of Americans are not. And we are all collectively trying to make changes and end systemic racism. Getting rid of the SROs will not solve this. No one deserves to die tragically. I understand and recognize this. The people on 9/11 didn't deserve to die the way that they did, but we did not protest to get rid of all planes, did we? So please, let's separate Black Lives Matter from this decision. Last night, a friend of a school board member said that the two students who wrote the petition in favor of SROs were not Black enough to make this decision. In fact, they said they were white passing biracial. An adult, one trying to make changes, is saying this. Please let that sink in. Students, all school employees, and parents deserve the right to feel safe. A buzzer behind a desk at the hand of a secretary is not a quick enough solution to stop a shooting, break up a fight with knives, or any other act of violence. As a teacher myself in a neighboring high school, I am defenseless in these situations because I am there to teach. Students are there to learn. Nurses are there to keep youth and community healthy. Custodians are there to keep our schools clean. Food service is there to feed and ensure our students are getting the healthiest nutrients possible. Bus drivers are there to safely transport students to school. The police officers are there to keep the youth and all its valuable employees safe. Those are our jobs. Please let the officers continue to do their valuable job, keeping youth safe from harm, building strong relationships, and going above and beyond their duties to fill voids some youth may have because they have an unhealthy or unsafe situation at home. These students have a right to feel safe. This is not the time to make kids fearful of police, but to encourage building relationships despite one's career title or race. to form healthy community relationships. I encourage all listeners to please listen to our side. Our point of view matters.
I need you to wrap it up, Tristan. Your time's up.
Okay. Our point of view matters. Is the current resolution important enough to risk the potential lives of our children, your children? Please consider the new proposed resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Tristan. All right, next we're going to go to Susanna.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, my name is Susanna Ledoux, and I currently have an incoming freshman and senior at Portland High. Let me start by saying that I'm 100% against racism in all forms, and I believe in the long-term removal of the need for SROs. I think going forward with this before the children are supposed to go back to school in the fall, that all the things would be in place or the removal would not be safe for anyone, including the people that it's meant to protect. Because of the times that we're currently in, where there may need to be wearing masks, I do not think that it is safe for them to be at school without an SRO, and I'm not sure that I feel comfortable to have either of my children being in that environment without him until I know what the plan is in case of violence in the school. I do not think that the people involved in making this decision who are supporting the immediate removal are taking into consideration the safety of all students or the capacity to get all of this accomplished on top of everything happening. I think it's irresponsible and dangerous to remove anything without having something solid in place, and I think that there should be a year that we work through this while they implement this into the school while the world is in such an uncertain time. In a perfect world, there would be no need for police, but there are children, regardless of color, who are not as likely to do things with an SRO in school. I am speaking from the perspective of someone who knows because I have an open dialogue with my son, who also does not feel comfortable with removing the SRO, that there are a lot of things that go on in Portland High that adults know nothing of. I support building positive relationships and reestablishing the rules of the officers while they are phased out. I do not see how ripping him out immediately supports the safety of the children. I understand that the system needs an overhaul, but it is not possible for this to happen overnight. I question the logic in removing him during a time that is already traumatic, and I do not see how people aren't seeing the potential in an event that could make it very easy for people to come into the school with masks, and it really bothers me that no one has mentioned this as an issue or as any other plan in place in case of this occurring. I do not support the immediate removal. There must be something in place first. Otherwise, I do not believe that this has anything to do with the actual safety of the students. I support the amended resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Susanna. All right, next we're going to go to Tegan Moon.
Yes, hello. So I'm Tegan Moon. Do you need my address for this?
Yes, please.
I live at 98 Wellington Road, and I'm a student at Portland High. I think I would like to speak against this current resolution. I have not read the other resolution yet, but I think in this current time we need to act with urgency in regards to systems that uphold systemic racism and white supremacy. And I think the SROs are an integral part of that. Having a police presence in the school turns issues that should be handled by the school into issues that are handled by law enforcement. This leads to arrests for issues that would be better handled by the school and punishes kids for not being fully mentally developed. There are many situations that need intervention, but not from police. The school needs to make its social workers and other staff members more prominent and hire more of them rather than having SRO working as one. I think that more students would actually be more willing to come forward with issues if they knew that they would not be arrested, which SRO could possibly do. SROs are also a barrier to having safe and inclusive schools, and we need to bring our attention to solutions that would actually help everyone. Thank you for listening.
Erica?
Oh, can you hear me? Sorry.
Sorry, I was muted. We're going to Erica Lee Winship.
Good. I couldn't hear you, so I was like, oh, did I miss something? Thanks. My name is Erica Lee Winship. I live at 26 Fall Lane, and I teach at Portland High, and I'd like to speak in support of this amendment for a number of reasons. First, please remember that positions and procedures are put in place for a reason. SROs didn't just appear out of the blue or because there was extra money that school districts were looking to spend. They clearly play a role in schools and meet a set of needs. It's not to say that we can't meet those needs in a different way. The amendment on the table gives us a clear timeline and deadline to explore a different model or to more clearly define the role of an SRO in the context of our anti-racist work. I believe the passion on both sides is so intense because there's truth on both sides of this debate. Anyone who cannot see that is not really listening or learning. The original resolution forces us to take a side right now and does not model the collective learning and collaborative decision-making that has become the norm of this board and in this district. If you are doing your job as a representative, you've been listening carefully and understand that such quick action may not be prudent in this situation. This resolution allows you to create a space for dialogue and decision-making that is informed and transparent, rather than piecemealing policy together via public comment. I remind you that the devil is in the details. As Ms. Figdor stated earlier, a meaningful process takes time. I would also like to remind you that the narrative in the June 16th resolution is not entirely true at the local level. While the school to prison pipeline narrative is true in big cities, and probably a fact, there's currently not a single Portland High or Deering High student at Long Creek. I attribute that amazing fact to the work of our SROs. I also take issue with the notion that SROs do not make our schools safer, because there's no way to compare what safety and discipline data would look like currently had SROs not been in place for the last 20 years. This resolution allows for more information and data gathering and a real careful analysis of information to make an informed decision about the positive and negative impacts our SROs have in our community. It also allows a larger number of teachers and students, our most important and knowledgeable stakeholders, to participate in the process more openly. I really wish we had more of an opportunity to talk face-to-face via smaller committee work and to come to consensus over the details about what a safe and orderly environment really means. Finally, I've heard many members of the board say that this isn't about the individual doing the job, but I say it is. There's no doubt that an SRO could do harm, but so can a teacher or a parent. But it's often an outstanding individual that gives us hope, helps us imagine the possibilities, and inspires us to be our best. Officer Bennis represents everything a school resource officer could and should be. Can you be sure that removing him from our school in the absence of dialogue is the best way to root out systemic racism in our community? Or do we want to tackle this issue head on, work out a thoughtful plan, revise our policies, and have the tough conversations that foster listening, learning, respect, and acceptance? That's my vision for this amendment, and I hope it will be yours too. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Next, we're going to go to Gabby Daniels. And Gabby, before you start speaking, I just want to mention the next names that are up on the queue. So after Gabby, we're going to go to Jessica Milneal, then Zachary Bull, then Lauren Sons, and then Ariel Lynette. Okay. Gabby, were you able to unmute yourself?
Chair, I think you skipped Noel Pisa.
When I read him out or right now?
Just now you went from Jessica Milneal to Zachary Bull and passed over Noel, who is...
I'm scrolling down right now.
I'm looking at the list that Board Member Burke has posted of next ups.
I don't see Noel on the list on the attendees right now. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, let's go to Gabby. Gabby, were you able to unmute yourself?
Hello.
Hello, Gabby.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go for it.
Hi, I'm Gabby Daniels. I live off Outer Forest Ave. I'm a biracial student at Portland High School. Co-created a petition that has garnered over 1,000 different signatures in favor of keeping our 2 SROs and co-author of the new resolution. Since expressing my voice at the last school board meeting, I have been contacted by many like-minded teachers, parents, students of color, and Portland residents, many of whom are afraid to go public in fear of facing retribution. My sister and I have gone to public and to local news outlets to express our concerns over the hasty decision the school board intends to make tonight. It is unfortunate that we had to go to local news channels to express our voices as students who will be impacted by this very important vote. For all the research the board cites, there isn't any research or statistics demonstrating the importance of SROs play in the development of our students and benefits, such as reducing crime and increasing safety. The Cutler Institute, which has been highly cited by the board, clearly states on page 2, this report does not assess the impacts of SROs on students. To truly gauge the impacts of SROs, further research needs to focus on those impacted, students, parents, and school personnel. The Cutler report also only researched Sanford, Augusta, Lewiston, Old Town, and Falmouth high schools. This report doesn't even represent the diverse communities at Portland or Deering high schools, which is why we need to conduct local research centered on our most relevant stakeholders, the students and staff at Deering and Portland High, which can be accomplished in the new proposed resolution. The Cutler report is seen as a reliable source despite 0 Portland students being surveyed. When students from Portland were surveyed, and 90% of the respondents wanted to keep SROs, it was slammed as biased and not accurate. How is that? Before voting, we need to hear from the majority of the student demographics from Portland and Deering High. The fact that people, many of which who do not reside in Portland or Maine with no current affiliation to either high school, do not belong in this conversation. Those of whom are trying to get rid of Officer Black and Officer Bennis when they do not know what each of them does for their school communities is demoralizing and character assassination to these wonderful men who wear their badge proudly. These SROs have touched the life of our diverse community, oftentimes when no one is aware. Removing these SROs would be a travesty and have a major impact on minority students. Is the school board aware that these SROs attend community events, sporting events, provide meals on their own dollar, and lend emotional support to students going through a trying time? Is the school board aware that these SROs work hand in hand with our social workers and on their own time find and locate students who have not attended school for long periods of time in hopes of integrating them back into the school communities? Is the school board aware of Officer Bennis' portraits of students of color and hope they will feel welcomed in the Portland community? Is the school board aware that one morning before school, Officer Black noticed a man loading a gun in the school alley where students were walked through every day and prevented a man from ending lives that day? Our SROs go above and beyond for the Deering and Portland High school communities, more than any social worker ever would. For all the Portland residents who are listening, if the school board votes to remove the SROs on July 14th, vote no on the school board's proposed $120 million school budget, so the SRO programs allocated money will carry over to next year's school year. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabby. Next, we're going to go to Zachary Bull.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, I'm Zachary Bull, and I'm a Portland community member. While I appreciate the concerns brought up in this discussion, I do not believe that this amendment will truly meet the needs of the school, the community, the state, or the nation. I understand their calls for further planning, but it is vital that the school board take today to stand in solidarity with BIPOC students across our nation by committing to the removal of the SROs in our schools as part of Portland's work against the school-to-prison pipeline in Maine. Given the huge body of evidence failing to find positive effects of SROs, in conjunction with the huge body of evidence highlighting their negative effects all over the nation, I do not believe a Portland-specific study is necessary to make such an informed decision. I applaud this amendment's call for a collaborative plan that involves all stakeholders, but I do not believe this is the time to compromise on anti-racist action. While a plan must be put in place to replace the role of the SRO in schools, I believe that the board is committed to such a process and that this commitment is reflected in the comments made prior to this proposed amendment for the supervisor to engage in a detailed analysis of ways to move forward. Supporters of this amendment have thus far failed to address the legal precedent set by SROs in our schools. While many have had positive experiences with SROs in Portland, just as I did when I went to school in Falmouth, we do not need more data to reveal the harmful effects of SROs in far too many communities in Maine and in the nation. The continuation of the Portland SRO program, especially if it is set in a positive light, would set a dangerous legal and social precedent that could be leveraged to further the SRO program in other schools, where it will surely be used to further harm to all students and especially to BIPOC students. In the 21st century, I believe that we can, should, and must protect our students without relying on armed police officers in our schools. I want to call on the board members here today to recognize not only their responsibility to Portland community stakeholders, but also to the Maine community and to the nation by rejecting this amendment as it currently stands and ultimately by voting in favor of the termination of the SRO program. Thank you for your time and energy tonight.
Thank you, Zachary. Next, we're going to go to Lauren Sons. And Lauren, before you speak, just give me a second to call out the names of the next people on the queue. So after Lauren, we're going to go to Ariel Lynette, then Julia Brown, Sarah Aubert, and then Madeline Goodman. Okay, Lauren?
Hi, this is actually Kate Vaughn again, using Lauren's computer. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
So I live at 339 Woodford Street, and I am against the resolution proposed by Ms. Thompson. I'm almost at a loss for what to say, but I did want to say that as I was listening to the reading of the resolution, I couldn't help but feel what I was hearing was the co-opting of discourse about justice to perpetuate white privilege and police control in our schools. You know, an attempt to draw out a process and deny very loud and clear voices of students who have and teachers who have said that the presence of SROs are leveraged against them for disciplinary reasons, that they are uncomfortable and feel a lack of safety in the presence of those officers. So earlier, someone just talked about how we need to hear from the majority, and I want to encourage us to actually consider that just a few students coming forward and saying the impact this has on their lives, Black and brown students saying that, is enough. And instead, seeking majority opinions in this case, we ought to encourage the majority to listen and care about and express empathy for those students who say that this disrupts their learning and it negatively impacts their well-being. In addition to those student perspectives, we also have very good data that tells us that SROs do not improve safety and lead, you know, they are a chain in that piece of the school to prison pipeline. So we don't need more information. We do not need more time. It feels like there are a lot of white adults who need to look in the mirror and ask why we are willing to sacrifice the social, emotional, and educational well-being of some Black and brown students in this school district to maintain some false sense of safety that has actually been disproven by very clear data. So I'm absolutely opposed to this resolution, and I'm very grateful for all the students who have bravely come forward and talked about the negative impacts this has on their learning. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Next, we're going to go to Ariel Lynette.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Thank you all for the opportunity and for the dialogue this evening. My name is Ariel Lynette. I live on Maine Ave in North Deering in Portland. I'm a community member and a lawyer for kids with disabilities, although I'm here tonight speaking only on my own behalf. I've had the opportunity to see the criminal justice system for young people by going behind the walls at Long Creek and by working with young people who have experienced the effects of being involved in the juvenile justice system, the vast majority of whom have disabilities. I'm speaking to oppose Ms. Thompson's amendment and to support the original resolution. I'd like to say that I'm proud and moved by the outpouring of Black Lives Matter activism that we've seen worldwide lately and in our community. And I think that this is a moment that we need to act with urgency and work towards the community and the values that we want to have, and to send a message about that everyone should feel safe in our schools, especially the young people who are telling us and have been telling us that for so long they have not. It sounds to me like people want to keep SROs in schools out of fear of harms that haven't happened, despite the harm that many students and community members experience through the presence of police in our schools. So we've heard a lot of incredible ideas, and we have so much expertise within our communities of how to embrace our kids' needs and encourage their growth and their health. And we can do that in so many important ways, but we can't do that through police in our schools. So I urge the board to support the resolution without this amendment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ariel. Next, we're going to go to Julia Brown. Julia.
Hi. Good evening. My name is Julia Brown. I am the Advocacy and Outreach Attorney at the Immigrant Legal Advocacy Project, or ILAP, and I'm also a resident of Portland. ILAP is Maine's only statewide nonprofit provider of immigration law and related legal aid to Maine's low-income residents. I want to provide context that we have not yet heard about serious immigration consequences stemming from having a law enforcement presence in schools. We've heard about the school-to-prison pipeline, but there is also a school-to-deportation pipeline caused by many of the same factors. Black and brown kids, many of whom are also immigrants, are stopped and arrested more often by SROs than their white classmates. Many immigrant youth have higher rates of anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder due to anti-immigrant rhetoric and policies, as well as fears of immigration enforcement and concerns about immigration status of themselves and loved ones. These can manifest in behaviors that may mistakenly be treated as disciplinary problems. When SROs become involved in school discipline, kids may end up getting arrested for behavior that normally would be handled by school staff. We also cannot ignore the enormous increase in immigration enforcement by Border Patrol and ICE over the last few years. Even if an SRO does not or would not contact ICE, students could reasonably fear that they would, and could even associate SROs with ICE officers. Once a non-citizen child has been arrested or convicted of an offense, immigration agencies will see the arrest, adjudication, or conviction if the child ever applies for an immigration benefit. An immigration benefit could be something like a green card or special immigrant juvenile status. Even a simple arrest could lead to complications in or denial of a youth's immigration application. It does not matter if an arrest or deferred disposition does not show up on a background check. A student must disclose an arrest on every immigration application. One simple arrest could be used as evidence to deny a student's application for immigrant status. The simple presence of law enforcement in schools leads to more interaction between students and the police. Students of color are more likely to be arrested by SROs, and many of those Portland students are immigrants. It is no exaggeration to say that an SRO's arrest of a non-citizen student could lead to that student being denied immigration status and possibly be deported. The school board must consider the immigration consequences of continued law enforcement presence in schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Next, we're going to go to Sarah Obeir.
Hi, thank you. I'm Sarah Obari. I live at 37 Birchwood Drive. I'm a teacher at Portland High School. I want to thank school board member Sarah Thompson for what I see as a call for a process and for collaboration, and that's what I hear in this resolution. When the chair read the statement from the author of the Cutler report, one of the things that stands out to me is that she said that other personnel, such as social workers, and you named a bunch that I couldn't quite catch quick enough, might be a better fit for meeting the needs that are currently being met by an SRO. And I want to point out again that while we keep trying to nail down specifically where the funding will go, it hasn't been said that it would be in the form of personnel to meet these needs at the high school. And I think that's a really important point to make. I still don't think we have it right yet. And I know that we keep saying that it's not about the right person, but when I spoke to my son about, who is a freshman at Portland High and who is brown to be more specific, he said, "Great, we're going to get rid of SROs in school police in our school." And then he paused and said, "Oh, you mean Officer Bennis? Oh, not him. I want him to stay." So it's really important for those people in the public who are calling out the white people who are speaking up and saying, "Wait a minute, We need to know how these needs are going to be met. It's really important to know who you're calling out. You're calling out white mothers of brown children. You're calling out family members of people who are named in the original MOU as people who have been murdered in this city, and telling us to look in the mirror and to think about what we're asking for. And what we're asking for is that before you defund the police, before you remove the SROs, please have a plan for how you're going to meet the needs of the students in that building, specifically those people of color. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Next, we're going to go to Madeline Goodman.
Good evening. My name's Madeline Goodman. I live at 63 Vanna Avenue in Portland. I'm actually a 1981 graduate of Portland High School, probably one of the older graduates in the room. I have a sophomore currently going into Portland High School. We are a mixed race family. I am white and he is brown. I stand in full support of School Board Member Thompson and the new amended resolution to delay the removal of the SROs. I don't want to see anything done hastily or impulsively, and I think it would be terrible to do something as quickly and as urgent as people are suggesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Madeline. Next, we're going to go to Junie In.
Hello?
Hello?
So my name is Junie In. I live on India Street in the east end of Portland, formerly of the Riverton area. I am a Portland native. I am a DHS graduate of class of 2017, but I also started my high school career at Portland High School. I strongly oppose Ms. Thompson's revised amendment and would like to ask for clarifications if this board meeting is a conversation about a finalized amendment or a finalized solution to the divestment of the Portland Police Department, the PPS with the Portland Police Department. I have 3 points. A lot of folks who have spoken tonight have really stressed and proven the point that SROs within schools do, in fact, have a much more worse impact on students. Exemplary of the conversation tonight is I graduated in 2017. It's been 3-ish years since I've graduated. I'm not going to go into a personal anecdote, but there is a notable sort of power play happening where a lot of students have spoken up. It seems to me parents or staff in support of Member Thompson's revision are seeking to ensure that policing of students, that sort of institutional tool of policing persists so that, that real change is not inundated. And we know now, we have testimonies from students past and prior of the Portland public school system who have come up. There is no more need for time to investigate. It'd be a disservice to those students who have spoken up, and it's just a moot point. Like Zachary Bull made a very strong point that what the time we're spending right now to discuss like what processes to do that can be invested in already divesting in the police and creating these councils that are majority student led so that this sort of power imbalance can be redistributed and students can have much more of an impact and a part of the environments that are suited for them. Thank you. I concede my time.
Thank you, Junie. Next, we're going to go to Ashley Daniels.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Ashley. Go ahead.
Okay, hi, my name is Ashley Daniels. I live on Outer Forest Ave, and I am an incoming junior at Portland High School. Before I read my speech, I'd like to read a quote from the Cutler Institute. It says, "Constraints on the study limited the investigators' ability to conduct surveys and interviews of other stakeholders. To provide a more comprehensive portrait of the impacts of SROs, Further research with system stakeholders should test whether the perspectives of these stakeholders hold true for those in other jurisdictions. And most importantly, future studies should pursue input from stakeholders not included in this study, namely students, parents, youth advocates, and school staff. The last 24 hours have been discouraging. I feel that even though my sister and I have poured everything we have into our petition, countless news stories, emails, messages among our peers, and now this new resolution, our voices are still being ignored. I want to ask everyone here something. Do you feel comfortable around a police officer? Have you ever spoken with one in daily life? Have you ever had the chance to form a friendship with a member of the Portland Police Department? How many of you can honestly say that you've spoke to our SROs and know more about them than just their names and their job title? I'm willing to bet not many. How dare you guys claim what's best for all minority students? If anyone here cared about the students and staff at Portland and Deering, you would vote for Sarah's resolution to extend the Memorandum of Understanding 1 year in order to hold more of a discussion among the community and conduct research within our schools as to what is truly best for our staff and students. Everyone is making this issue into war instead of a battle. May 19th, the school board received overwhelming support from staff and students in favor of keeping the SROs. This is not a budget issue. The school board has a $120 million budget, and the $150,000 allocated by the district towards these officers is only 70% of the actual cost. The Portland Police pay the remaining 30%. I've seen a lot of comments saying that the board can use the $150,000 that would be saved with the termination of the Portland's MOU towards hiring more licensed clinical social workers for Portland and Deering High. However, this money isn't even enough to afford 2 full-time social workers. I want to ask you something again. Who are you going to call when you're in danger? Who is going to protect you when you can't protect yourself? Who do you know that will come to your beck and call at any hours of the day to save you when you're in a dangerous situation? If you thought the police to any of those questions, then you need to listen up. We are not standing up to say that Black lives don't matter. We are not standing up to defend Derek Chauvin or any of the officers who have committed acts of racism against people of color. We are standing up for what we believe is best for our schools, and I ask that we have a conversation, hear from more people, and ask every individual student and staff member how they personally feel on the issue, not how they feel about others. I want to make sure that before we make an important decision like this, without hearing from all stakeholders in the community, the board hears from every voice and forms a more well-informed decision on what we want versus what you want. I fully support Sarah's resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. Next, we're going to go to Hoskins. And before you speak, if I can just call out the names of the next people that are in the queue. So after Hoskins, we're going to go to Jenny Gwen. Then we have Mayat, Dave Moran, and then James Patefield, excuse me. Hoskins?
Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
If you can give us your name and address, and then I'll give you 3 minutes.
Thanks. My name is Melissa Hoskins, and I live at 52 Smith Street. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I'm a clinical social worker, and I have 2 students in Portland Public School currently. I just want to say quickly that I appreciate the comments made by the superintendent at the opening of this meeting, and also the professional facilitation by the chair. To speak to I am speaking against this amendment. To speak to the concern of a lack of plan, I just heard a lot of talk about how there's only 2 schools with RSOs, and I think there's a lot of solutions that could be found in the other schools that are functioning without them. And I also appreciated the suggestion of crisis as a different intervention support. I think it's important to clearly name that this is a racial issue because it involves an institution, like so many others, that interact with people of different races differently, namely the police. I'm very concerned that there's a possibility that we as a community may continue to perpetuate a status quo that prioritizes white comfort over Black, Indigenous, and people of color's fear, which is legitimized not only by their personal perspective and experience, but by hard data, some of which was cited during the previous public hearing and this one, and is available widely. I'm also concerned that action will be delayed in the name of further study, or because a desired alternative has not been identified. This act of delay and these reasons for it continue to prop up harmful systems. Action is needed. I want to acknowledge the apparent thoughtfulness and consideration of the board and also name that the board itself is not representative of the demographics present in the school that will be impacted by their ultimate decision. Once again, a majority white group will make a decision for all people impacted. I want to echo some of the feedback shared during the last hearing to consider whose safety you are prioritizing in these decisions. As a white person myself, I am acquainted with the challenges of white fragility and the necessity to recognize this as we sit at a table of power that is not representative of our community. I am grateful for your service to the community and appreciate deeply the time you have taken and the consideration you have given to this issue. Please vote to remove police from our schools without further delay. Thank you so much, and I just really appreciate all of you. This is a difficult decision.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Next, we're going to go to Jenny Gwen.
Hi, my name is Jenny, and I live at 37 High Street. I was previously a Riverton resident, and I'm a Portland High School alum. So I just want to say first, regardless of what stance you have on this, it's clear that all, or at the very least, most of the individuals here advocating for the respective view are here because they want to keep the students in our high school safe. However, I think it is important that we look at the facts and research that we do have that indicates SROs do not keep schools safe, at the very most are neutral, and at the very worst make schools an unsafe place for marginalized students. So let's examine some of the facts that we have, some research that have been conducted about this issue in particular. Research from the Government Accountability Office suggests that Black students in K-12 schools are far more likely to be disciplined, whether through suspension or involvement in law enforcement, than students of any other race. This did not change even when they controlled for the type of punishment, the kind of school, or the average income of the student's family at the school. Further, Columbia Law's Center for Intersectionality and Social Policy Studies found that Black girls are 6 times as likely to be suspended as white girls, and Black boys are 3 times as likely to be suspended as white boys. A study published in the Journal of Criminal Justice found that the high number of disorderly conduct incidents at schools with SROs compared to schools without them is consistent with the theory that SROs contribute to criminalizing student behavior. Having an SRO at the schools in this study significantly increased the rate of arrest for this charge by over 100%, even when controlling for school poverty. You can look at this data and think that because we don't have local data, it's inaccurate, or thinking that, well, our SROs are good, they foster good relationships with students, or other people that are saying, I've met the SROs at our school, they're very nice, or any of the other anecdotal evidence that people have been citing today. But it's not comparable to the data that we do have, the data that we have that suggests SROs in schools do more harm than good for marginalized students in our schools. And so clearly people are concerned what would happen in a school shooting or something like that, or some other danger without an SRO. And I'm here to tell you that the school in Parkland, Florida, during the school shooting that they had a school resource officer on duty during the shooting. The sheriff said that the officer remained outside in a defensive position at the time of the shooting. So there is currently nothing that certainly proves SROs would provide the protection needed to prevent or stop a school shooting. I appreciate and hear School Board Member Thompson's proposal that we should wait 1 year and use that time to look at our options and what would be best for our schools. However, why keep an entity that statistically makes schools unsafer and makes schools feel unsafe to the marginalized? Even if you don't believe that this is an explicit issue right now, wouldn't it make sense to remove what could possibly be an issue right now or is an issue to marginalized students right now, rather than continue to keep a staff position that actively makes students uncomfortable with data that suggests bad outcomes? I urge the members of the school board to put Black and BIPOC trauma over the inconvenience or dissatisfaction of students who happen to have good interactions with the police. I urge the members of the school board to consider the stakes that are at hand right now, make a decision right now, and hopefully consider using the funds we currently have on things more necessary for our schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Next, we're going to go to Mayat.
Hi, good evening. I'm Therese Myatt. I live at 10 Cleveland Street. I'm a teacher at Portland High School. I have attended 2 polarized board meetings on the subject of SROs in Portland's high schools. Each one was very one-sided. The first featured testimonials from students and staff inside each school, extolling Officer Mike Bennis and Officer Steve Black's exemplary job performances in the SRO role. Speakers at the second meeting, in the wake of George Floyd's death, presented legitimate concerns and national research against SROs in high schools. As I heard descriptions of student fears of SROs who arrest students for school disciplinary issues, creating the school-to-prison pipeline, I thought how fortunate we are to have SROs who are the antithesis of the SROs described in that meeting or featured in the national news. Clearly, those who spoke and want to terminate our positive relationship with the Portland Police Department have never set foot in our high schools to witness firsthand how our SROs operate. As a teacher who has witnessed the fine work of our SROs during my 16 years at Portland High, I ask you not to rush to judgment and eliminate our SROs this evening. Doing so will hand schools more problems without a plan in place. Choose to be proactive rather than reactive. And I urge you to consider Ms. Thompson's counter-proposal, which will allow time to come up with a lasting policy that allows input from all stakeholders and accomplishes the goals of community police reform. Creating a solution is more important than making a statement. We are in a position to show the world how to do this right. We have 2 SROs who embody the tenets of community policing. Officer Benison Black build trusting relationships with all students, diffuse inflammatory situations, prevent the school-to-prison pipeline, and protect students and staff, and promote the human side of policing. Their work with high school students will positively influence future police interactions and perceptions. Let them continue their work with our students and staff. Let them be an important voice in rewriting and revising the policy and the MOU with the Portland Police Department. Let Portland, Maine show the world that school resource officers are not a problem that needs to be eliminated, but a force that can help pave the way for much needed improved police interactions across the nation. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we're going to go to Dave Moran.
Hi, thank you very much. Been a lot of passion and conviction as I've listened to this meeting tonight.
Dave, I'm sorry. Do you mind introducing yourself again? Just your name.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Dave Moran. I live at Deepwood Drive. I apologize. Forgot about that part. No, again, and thank you. This has been very enlightening to listen to. Again, a lot of passion, a lot of conviction on the subject. I am standing, frankly, in support of the amendment as brought forward by School Board Member Thompson, in part because I think there is just a lot going on here. Clearly a very complex situation, a lot of variables in play here. What I am hearing when people talk and speak about and taking a position, some of this is coming down to what you're giving weight to, right? Is safety versus, school counseling and reimagining kind of a different way of approaching things on behalf of the students. I'm going to say that personally, I feel after listening to everything, there are policy issue concerns, budget concerns, safety concerns, transparency concerns. I would vote more for, let's take a good hard look. Let's actually talk about what weight people are giving to certain criteria and in terms of what goes into making a decision, and really be thoughtful about the positioning in terms of making a decision and what we need to do going forward. I also would prefer to see more of a plan. What is our future end state? What does that look like? And then we can work backwards from there in terms of what needs to be true to get to that end state. I know there's been the amendment and resolutions talking about reallocating the funds in a certain way. There might not be enough there, but I think if we have a good, robust conversation, we might come to maybe even a very different but very useful solution if we just don't get caught up in the emotion of the moment and act hastily. So my recommendation and my strongest opinion on this is let's table this for a year as requested, and really take a good hard look at this and get everybody involved. And in terms of transparency and inclusion, let's get everybody involved in the conversation. So, thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Next, we're going to go to James Patefield, excuse me. I didn't say that.
Hi. Yeah, no, you got it right. Can you hear me okay? Good evening. My name is James Patefield, and I live at 54 Tremaine Street in Portland. I am speaking strongly against the current resolution proposed by Ms. Thompson. I feel that the amendment equivocates to be for a position of listening and learning while actually being about delaying or tabling vital decisions to accommodate white comfort and ensure that no changes are actually made. I'm so glad that Jenny brought us back to the data and the research a few comments ago, because there is a massive body of evidence and data that points to the school to prison pipeline nationally and is supported by multiple testimonials here in Portland, as others have mentioned. And to pretend that we simply, quote, don't have the data here in Portland, I think is naive in the extreme. In terms of safety concerns, SROs are not proven to stop or deter school shootings, per a 2013 study from Texas State University's ALERT program. Those criminologists found that in 25 school shootings analyzed as part of the study, absolutely none, zero, were brought to an end by armed staff, guards, or police officers. Most commonly, these shootings were stopped by restraints conducted by unarmed staff. And SROs were indeed placed in schools for a reason. That reason, as stated by Danielle Layton, the author of the Cutler Institute study that the resolution cites, is to improve the institution of police in the eyes of students. It's a propaganda tactic that serves no purpose for school safety. And it needs to be reiterated that this is not about individual SROs. This is about SROs as a representative of a system. I feel comfortable around police because I am supposed to, because I am a white man. The system is built around preserving my comfort, and we should all examine the fact that that comfort comes at the explicit expense of others, specifically Black and brown people. And how do we know that? Because Black and brown people have told us so. I know that this is a challenging decision and a complicated discussion, but I think the decision before the school board is actually quite simple. I agree completely that we should have a plan. And in fact, I would argue that right now, at this very moment, is the ideal time to take action and develop such a plan. If we kick the can down the road for another year, guess what? We will not come up with a plan. Systemic change is possible and can be made collaboratively, but pushing this decision off is irresponsible. The school board must terminate the SRO program now and reallocate those resources in a useful way. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Loud and clear. So next, we're going to go to Sophia Tushinsky.
Hi, is my microphone working?
Yes, also loud and clear.
Hi, my name is Sophia Tushinsky. I'm 17 years old. I live at 37 Bancroft Street, and currently I'm a student at Deering High School. So what I've noticed tonight in this school board meeting is that a lot of the speakers have been community members, not students actually in the building themselves. And I think it's important that first we acknowledge that, especially for Black, Indigenous, or other people of color, it would be very difficult to speak out against for the removal of SROs, considering that these SROs might not even be removed in schools and may lead to even more unfair targeting in schools that is already present, of course, but even more for those particular students. I think it's important to note that we have two SROs that the majority of students are against. Casco Bay only has one part-time social worker, and social workers are so incredibly important and essential and valuable to a high school. In particular, like mental health resources and high school resources are so important in a high school setting because it's so stressful. And the fact that we have two SROs, when as the statistics mentioned earlier in comments, can actually cause trauma to Black, Indigenous, or other people of color students in schools. I think it's very important that we immediately, I'm very against this amendment. It's important that we immediately remove school resource officers and begin hiring more mental health services for our schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. Next, we're going to go to Grace Callahan. Grace?
Hello?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I'm Grace Callahan, she, hers. I live on Hartley Street in Portland, Maine, in the Deering Center neighborhood, and I'm a recent alum of Portland Public Schools. I went to Deering and I graduated from Casco Bay. And I am strongly against this resolution. This is not an issue where majority rule and gradual reform are ethical solutions. As I said, I'm a recent alum of Portland Public Schools, and I've heard countless stories of my peers, overwhelmingly Black and Indigenous people of color, women, and non-binary students being made incredibly unsafe and uncomfortable by the actions and presence of school resource officers at Portland and Deering. These stories have been retold and have been made public in the press. Hearing these stories and then deciding to wait for a majority decision, further and more in-depth studies and plans, is proclaiming your indifference to the suffering of your community members, especially when the majority of this city is white. We need action and empathy now. I would also like to say that I do not understand why the superintendent and other members of the school board profess to understand that the police, and especially armed police, make Black students less safe in school, and yet make exceptions for large events. I think Portland Public Schools need to more critically examine this and look into other ways to keep events safe without policing. As a specific example, in high school, police officers were, and I believe still are, always present at school dances. If the behavior at schools are worried about here is primarily substance abuse, I strongly disagree with the use of police officers here. Teenage drinking is just one of the many issues that is currently handled by police and should not be. And there are any number of studies that you can Google to educate yourself on why people of color and Black people in America are disproportionately criminalized and put in jail for nonviolent drug crimes. If we want to reverse the pattern of prioritizing safety of some over the trauma of others by removing police from schools, I don't understand how this doesn't also apply to events. We should not be contracting police officers for large events or anything under the purview of Portland Public Schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace.